But didn't our awakening method originate from the beastmen? How is it that we used it to fend off the comets, but they couldn't? Asher asked, his brow furrowed. Arnold raised an eyebrow, meeting his gaze. Didn't you cover that in your studies? I did, Asher admitted. It said the method was more compatible with humans. But that can't be the whole truth. If it was, we should have been able to awaken naturally, without anyone else's help. Arnold nodded thoughtfully. You're not wrong, but you're not entirely right either. Yes, this awakening method suited humans best, and we may have discovered it eventually on our own. But by the time we did, our lands would have already fallen. The leaders back then were wise enough to swallow their pride and strike a deal with the beastmen. He paused, his tone solemn. They traded a small continent for the chance to survive. And in return, we gained the key to our awakening. Asher nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the decision. It's about knowing what truly matters, Arnold continued. Pride? That's fleeting. What really counts is life and dignity. He leaned forward slightly, voice firm. Remember this, pride and dignity may seem alike, but they're worlds apart. Pride is thinking you're untouchable, never tolerating the smallest slight. Dignity, however, is the quiet strength of knowing your worth, accepting there's always someone better, and choosing to learn rather than resist. Pride blinds you. Dignity grounds you. Arnold's eyes hardened. But never give up your dignity. Never become anyone's servant. Our heroes taught us that. They died on the battlefield rather than bow their heads when the Comtes offered protection in exchange for submission. They chose death over slavery. His last words came with a cold, sharp edge, a sneer tugging at his lips. Asher, Ryan, and Claire nodded silently. Arnold's mood shifted as he clapped his hands together. Now, let's talk about where the Magnus family stands among the 10 supreme families. He grinned. Anyone want to take a guess? All three raised their hands eagerly. Arnold chuckled. Of course you know. But here you are, still listening to an old man ramble. His laughter echoed warmly through the hall. The kids blinked, stunned by the sudden mood swing. The adults smiled knowingly but said nothing. They were used to Arnold's shifts in tone, especially during the annual gathering marking a new generation's awakening. It had become tradition. Here we go again, Ryder thought, resisting the urge to comment. He knew better. Interrupting Arnold always ended badly. Arnold's expression turned serious once more. Our family's place among the 10 supreme families is thanks to our blood ruler ability. We're known as amplifiers. When someone from our bloodline has a child with another supreme family member, there's a 50% chance that child inherits both abilities, at their peak. He let the silence linger. That makes us essential to maintaining balance in the alliances. The blood ruler ability enhances others. It blends seamlessly with any power, creating something greater. That's how we've stayed on top for generations. Arnold's gaze swept over the younger generation, a silent reminder of the responsibility they carried. The Magnus family, he said, is Valeriosa's trump card. That's why this fortress exists, to ensure our bloodline remains strong. He gestured toward them. You three have awakened abilities strong enough to earn the title of Terror. But that's just the beginning. Let's talk about what comes next. He rang a small bell. Maid stepped in to replace the dishes, moving swiftly and silently. Arnold continued, You'll soon begin your journey at the World Academy, a place where only the most exceptional are admitted. Everyone there is a genius. He studied their faces. In your first week, you'll need to form your energy veins. That's the minimum requirement. For most, it takes a week. Of course, he added with a grin, there are exceptions. Like Asher here. Arnold gave Asher a hearty pat on the back. Too hearty. Asher nearly choked on his food. He turned to his grandfather with a stunned look. The maids had warned him about Arnold's iron hand, but he'd thought it was just gossip. Now, he wasn't so sure. The competition at the academy is brutal, Arnold went on. Only 100 students make it to their second awakening at age 18. Claire, curious but uneasy, asked, How many get admitted? 1,000, Arnold replied calmly. So only 10% make it to the end. Claire's eyes widened slightly. But don't worry, Arnold said, voice suddenly cold. There has never been a case of a terror failing to graduate. Not once. The warning in his tone was crystal clear. Failure wasn't an option. Asher, Claire, and Ryan exchanged quiet glances. The air grew heavier with unspoken expectations. Then, just as quickly, Arnold laughed again. Ha! Why so serious? Enjoy the feast. But the humor didn't land quite the same. The weight of responsibilities still lingered in the room. The kids stayed quiet, chewing thoughtfully. The adults smiled faintly, familiar with Arnold's rhythm of pressure and levity. He points a blade at our throats, then wonders why we're not laughing. They all thought silently, except for Celine, who remained calm and composed. That much is expected for terrors, she thought. Her resolve, like her gaze, was steady and unwavering. Finally, Asher was home. The dinner had ended, the guests had departed, and the mansion had grown quiet once again. His aunts and uncles had each left him with parting gifts, ranging from the practical to the extravagant. But his mother, ever composed, had simply walked up to him, offered a firm nod and a curt, "Good job," before handing him a sword, and leaving without another word. Now alone in his room, Asher sat on the edge of his bed, staring down at the weapon in his hands. The sword was unlike any he'd held before. A massive greatsword with a crimson, semi-transparent crystalline blade that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Its hilt was jet black, engraved with a sleek, bat-shaped emblem. The weight in his hands felt perfect, like it belonged to him. "Blood Eater," Asher whispered, instantly recognizing it. A legendary weapon, and not just in name. He could feel its dormant hunger pulsing with quiet power. He gently placed it on the table beside him and activated his ability. Absolute Appraisal. A soft glow enveloped the gifts surrounding him as intricate details began to surface in his vision. Blood Eater. Rating: Legendary. Durability: 1/110/1/110. Attack power: 1836. Effects: absorbs blood to regain durability. Increases sword mastery by +5. Skill generated: Blood Curse. Reduces target's healing by 100% for 10 seconds after a hit. Heavy strikes inflict a 3-second bleeding effect. Bleed damage scales with infused mana. Stacking bleeding status increases damage dealt by 500% for 10 seconds. When Blood Curse is applied 3 times, the target enters a berserk blood state, reducing cognitive ability by 50%. Lore: forged using the Blood Rose of Resentment, a rare bloom that only grows on battlefields soaked in hatred. Hidden effect: evolves by drinking the blood of a sanguine supreme with high concentrations of true blood. Asher raised an eyebrow. That last line caught his attention. "How much will it grow?" he asked curiously. "It depends on the host's level and purity of true blood offered." He nodded slowly. "I'll feed it when I'm stronger. Let it evolve with me." Setting the sword aside, he turned to the other gifts, beginning with the art manual from Uncle Liam. Black Assimilation. Rank S. Effect: allows a blood ruler to absorb poisons or elixirs through blood and gain their effects permanently. Asher's eyes gleamed. This could be game-changing. I already know what I want to assimilate. Next came Aunt Serena's gift, a beautifully designed goblet with silver runes and crimson glass. Goblet of the Blood Fountain. Effect: stores large quantities of blood for future use in techniques or emergencies. Capacity: 1,000 liters. This will be a lifesaver in prolonged battles, Asher murmured. Perfect for blood-based casting. Then came Uncle Ryder's gift, a rolled scroll tied with a red ribbon. Blood Golem Creation. Rank S. Effect: summons sentient blood golems. Can create 3 types, depending on user's mastery and understanding. Asher smirked. Combining this with the blood fountain, I can build an army on the battlefield. Finally, he turned to his grandfather's gift, a white staff with glowing red patterns, elegant and powerful. At the top perched a carved phoenix, its beak gripping a blood-red orb. Blood Phoenix Staff. Rating: Mythical. Durability: 1/500/1/500. Attack power: 1980. Magic power: 2150. Effects: blood empowerment, absorbs ambient or enemy blood to restore durability. Mana infusion, scales AoE and power of blood-based spells. Phoenix Flame of Blood, critical hits ignite blood flames for 5 seconds. Burn damage scales with magic power and blood absorbed. Blood Mastery. Staff Mastery +5. Boosts blood-related spells by 30%. Blood Phoenix's Rebirth, auto-activates when health drops below 20%, restoring 30% HP. Blood Curse, every strike reduces healing by 100% for 10 seconds. After 3 hits, target enters Berserk Blood state. Lore, crafted from the Blood Rose of Resentment, designed for those with a lineage steeped in blood and battle. Hidden effect. Blood Phoenix Growth, evolves when fed the true blood of a sanguine supreme. Another weapon made from the Blood Rose, Asher mused, reverently storing it away. Then, He turned his thoughts to the arts themselves. Soul, he called to his system, can I learn them instantly? Yes, but you lack skill points. The host can gain skill points by eliminating intelligent beings. The higher their level, the more skill points gained. Asher frowned, considering that. So, to grow stronger, I'll have to kill. He paused, then asked, how many skill points do I need to learn both? Arts in possession. Black assimilation, S. Blood golem creation, S. Cost per art 5 skill points. Total required 10 skill points. Alright, Asher whispered, I'll start preparing. He stored everything in his dimensional ring, leaned back into bed, and let out a long sigh. His mind was buzzing with thoughts of battle, evolution, and what lay ahead. Tomorrow, he muttered as sleep began to take hold, I'll head to the monster area. His eyes closed, the weight of the future resting on his shoulders, and a faint smirk on his lips. The path of a terror had only just begun.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The next morning, Asher awoke to soft sunlight filtering through his window. After a quick wash and dressing in his training attire, he made his way downstairs, where Emily waited at the breakfast table, greeting him with a warm smile. The spread was generous: freshly baked bread, ripe fruits, and spiced meats. Asher ate quickly yet savoringly, feeling both the weight and excitement of his newfound powers. Once finished, he nodded to Emily, signaling he was ready. They walked through the quiet corridors of the mansion and stepped outside, following a path that led to the heart of the estate. Here, an expansive field stretched before them, filled with iron cages and reinforced glass enclosures. Inside, captured beasts paced, their powerful forms restless and fierce. The area buzzed with activity as handlers and trainers monitored the creatures, taking notes and preparing for the day's trials. In one enclosure, a massive wolf with silvery fur prowled, its muscles rippling with every step. In another, a serpentine creature coiled, its iridescent scales catching the light. Asher took it all in, knowing that this was no ordinary training ground. Here, he would test his mettle, sharpen his skills, and confront the reality of combat against some of the most powerful creatures nurtured for exactly this purpose. As Asher was observing the various creatures, a man with an impeccably tailored suit approached him. He had a lean yet muscular build, silver hair neatly combed back, and a neatly trimmed beard. A monocle adorned one of his sharp eyes, adding to his dignified air. "Young master, how may I assist you today?" the man said politely, bowing with practiced grace. Asher gave a slight nod, noting the refined cut of the man's attire. "Sir Seabass, I want to fight goblins," he replied, his tone resolute. Goblins were among the intelligent creatures, and Asher knew he needed to defeat such beings to gain skill points. Seabass nodded simply. "Understood, young master. The goblin enclosure is prepared for your training. Shall we proceed?" Asher followed him, anticipation building as they walked toward the designated area where his first true test awaited. Seabass offered no warnings or cautions. With Emily nearby, any real danger would be swiftly handled. He led Asher down a grand corridor, stopping before a massive door engraved with a snarling goblin face. "This is the Goblin enclave," Seabass explained, gesturing to the doors within. "It holds goblins from iron rank up to legend rank, carefully prepared for the training of elites residing here." Asher looked on as Seabass opened the main door, revealing 3 more doors labeled Foundation, Ranker, and Titled. "Since young master is at the first stage of the Foundation realm, we'll proceed with the Foundation rank," Seabass continued, guiding him forward. Inside, the passage branched out into even more doors, each labeled by rank: iron, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and diamond. No prismatic rank door was visible. Its existence remained a well-kept secret, known only to him, and he don't know when he should reveal it. "Young master, as you're currently at iron rank, it would be best to enter here for your training," Seabass advised, motioning toward the iron door. Asher nodded, ready to take his first steps into the enclave and begin his training. As Asher stepped through the iron rank door, he found himself in a vast, dimly lit expanse that seemed more like a dense, untamed forest than a training facility. Towering trees with thick foliage filtered the light into scattered patches across the ground, casting an eerie greenish hue over the entire area. It felt alive, humming with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant growls. The air was thick and earthy, carrying the unmistakable scent of damp moss and soil. Ahead, he noticed faint movements in the shadows, small, nimble figures weaving through the trees. Goblins. These creatures were just as described, iron rank monsters, though their crude weapons and dirty clothing suggested a level of intelligence beyond simple beasts. Some were hunched over, muttering to each other in guttural tones, while others prowled silently, eyes gleaming with predatory focus. Nearer the entrance, he spotted a group of smaller creatures, baby goblins. Though not as dangerous as their adult counterparts, their eyes were just as sharp, and they moved quickly, darting from shadow to shadow as if aware of the threat he posed. Asher took a deep breath, steeling himself. With a flicker of energy, he summoned his Sanguine Supreme ability, shaping a long crimson blade crackling with red lightning. It pulsed in his hand, casting an ominous glow over the dark forest. However, he held it steady, choosing not to launch an immediate attack. Instead, he locked his gaze onto the goblins scattered among the shadows. His eyes shifted, taking on a bright red sheen as his power surged subtly forward. The effect was immediate. Every goblin, even those carefully hidden behind dense foliage, suddenly froze in place as though caught in an invisible snare. Emily, who had been watching him closely, raised her eyebrows, sensing something unusual. Her gaze turned questioning as she took in Asher's focused expression and the tightening of his grip on the hilt of his blade. Then, Asher's voice cut through the air, a cold whisper that echoed around them. Burst. With that single command, the goblins convulsed, green blood bursting from their forms in a violent, gruesome display. The forest fell silent, the ground soaked in a sickly shade of green as their bodies slumped to the earth. This is. Emily's eyes widened as she saw this. It seems your blood ruler ability didn't merely merge with black lightning. Instead, it devoured it, enhancing its own power, Seabass observed, impressed. Asher nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I was just preparing to slash them as usual, but suddenly, I could feel their heartbeats. It was as if their blood itself was calling to me, waiting for my command. I took control and turned their blood into spikes that pierced out from within. Emily gave a nod of approval, recognizing the seamless control Asher had over his ability. His mastery of Blood Ruler was advancing quickly, and the unexpected synergy with Black Lightning had only amplified his potential. Host gained 15 skill points. Asher looked at the notification, remembering how he had killed over 40 goblins but had only gained 15 skill points. Skill points depend on enemy level 2, Soul Voice reminded him. Asher nodded at this, then looked at the green blood scattered around. Condense, he murmured, and all the blood began to gather, eventually forming into several dark green glowing beads. What is this? Emily asked as she observed the floating beads. Asher glanced at her, then flicked one of the dark green beads forward. Once it reached the spot he intended, he calmly commanded, "Burst." Under Seabass and Emily's watchful eyes, the beads suddenly elongated into 2 long blades, piercing the trees on either side. The holes left were substantial, and one of the trees soon broke in half. This is a new technique, isn't it? Emily asked, examining it closely. It's effective but might be easier for experienced opponents to dodge. It's perfect for monsters and beasts though. She thought, it's a great technique for someone his age. That's impressive, young master, Seabass said, and Asher nodded. But, Asher added, I suppose it still needs some refining. How about we go to the next bronze door? He nodded in agreement. Asher thought to himself, I've gained enough points, but there's always room for more. And they continued on their way. Soon after leaving the iron door, they reached the bronze door. As they entered, Asher found himself in another forest biome. Youth Master, this area is inhabited by Bronze Realm goblins, Seabass reminded him. They know some basic mana techniques and have crude iron weapons they've forged themselves. Asher nodded, then closed his eyes as his Sanguine Supreme ability activated. Soon, the world around him turned black, and several red dots appeared in his vision. These red dots connected like veins, forming a network that mapped out the goblins' positions. Behind him, Seabass observed in surprise. Blood vision? He unlocked it this quickly? His eyes widened for a moment, but he quickly composed himself, continuing to watch Asher. Blood vision is like Serpent's thermal vision, where they can only see the heat signatures around them, while blood vision show only blood flowing through one. It mapped out one's whole vein system. I wonder how far you can go, he thought, continuing to guide the young master. Asher extended his hand toward the beating hearts he could sense, then clenched his fist. The hidden goblins who had been preparing to attack, suddenly clutched their chests, coughed up blood, and collapsed, lifeless. Once again, Asher condensed their blood into beads. Host gained 21 skill points. Asher nodded, pleased with his progress. As Asher condensed the last of the goblin's blood, he felt a surge of power ripple through him, the collected energy fueling his abilities. He focused, gathering it into a condensed dark green orb that floated above his palm, glowing faintly with raw energy. Good control, Seabass remarked, a hint of pride in his voice. But remember, the Bronze Realm may be only the beginning. Your powers will need refining in the higher realms. Asher gave a slight nod, his gaze shifting ahead. The goblins were weaker than expected, he said, a faint edge of disappointment in his voice. I need stronger opponents if I'm to master blood vision. Emily, who had been quietly observing, approached. Not every enemy needs to challenge you, Asher. Sometimes the lesson is in control, not strength. Just then, a sudden rustling echoed from the dense forest surrounding them. From the shadows emerged a large goblin, armored in heavy iron plates with faint etchings of runes carved into the metal. Unlike the others, it wielded a menacing-looking spear, dark and jagged, as if crafted for a single deadly strike. Seabass tensed slightly, stepping forward. Careful, young master. This one's a goblin general, far stronger than the rest. They're rare in the Bronze Realm, but this one seems to have developed some form of dark enchantment on his weapon. Asher nodded, already aware of the goblin general's unique abilities. He had deliberately chosen not to kill him outright. After all, he wanted to try something different. His heart-grasping technique worked well on goblins, given their lack of proper mana control and weak defenses around their hearts. But against a skilled opponent, this technique might not be as effective. He needed to test his limits and explore new tactics if he wanted to be prepared for stronger foes. This was also the reason Asher had spared the goblin general. He wanted to test another of his weapons. Gah! The goblin general roared, raising his greatsword as dark flames began to flicker around it. Interesting. A variant appeared in this door, Seabass murmured as he noticed the dark flames. These were no ordinary flames, they were resentment flames, created from gathering the hatred and anger of the goblin's fallen comrades. Young master, should I kill it? Seabass asked. Asher shook his head, his eyes glowing faintly, ominously. Perfect. I could use the practice. He called upon his sanguine supreme ability, and the world around him darkened once again, red veins highlighting the goblin's pulsing form. The goblin general let out a battle cry, charging forward with surprising speed, sword thrusting directly at Asher. With a fluid motion, Asher summoned two dark green blades from the condensed blood orb in his hand, crossing them just in time to intercept the sword. Sparks flew as iron clashed with his blood-forged weapons. Asher looked calmly at the goblin general. You lost, he said, his tone steady and cold. Emily and Seabass watched intently as the goblin general tilted his head in confusion, seemingly processing the question. But before he could respond, the tips of Asher's blood-forged sword suddenly extended, piercing the goblin general's head with lethal precision. The creature collapsed, lifeless. The fight concluded in an instant. Host gained 45 skill points. Asher glanced at the new skill points he'd gained, nodding in satisfaction. It was a fairly intelligent one, he remarked. In that last moment, the goblin general had tried to dodge by tilting its head, but Asher had simply curved the extending blade, piercing through and finishing it. Seabass and Emily exchanged a look, both impressed by Asher's precision and adaptability. Young master, would you like to proceed to the next silver door? Seabass asked. Normally, I wouldn't recommend it at this stage, but given your powers and talents, I would like to guide you there. Asher simply nodded in agreement. Seabass bowed and began leading the way toward the next door, followed closely by Asher and Emily. Asher now carried a blood orb with him, taken from the goblins he had defeated. It's almost enough, he thought as he glanced at his system interface. Learn the blood golem skill, he murmured, and a system prompt appeared. Would you like to comprehend and master the current skill for 5 skill points? Or would the host prefer to perfect this method and learn it fully for 30 skill points? Asher read both options and, without hesitation, chose the second one. Anyway, he has gained a total of 81 skill points. It was good for him to get a better version of it. Acknowledged. Congratulations. The Bloodborne skill is now available for use. Asher felt a rush of energy surge through him as the new skill settled into place, an innate understanding of its potential forming in his mind. He clenched his fist, feeling the blood orb respond as if it were an extension of his own will. This was no ordinary skill, it felt alive, resonating with his own power. Bloodborne skill, Blood Golem. Description: the Blood Golem skill allows the host to create a powerful golem of any kind, limited to host imagination, from condensed blood, bound to the host's will. This construct is autonomous, capable of carrying out complex commands, defending and attacking as directed. Attributes: strength, scales with the amount and quality of blood used. Durability, high resistance to physical and magical attacks. Regeneration, absorbs surrounding blood to heal or strengthen itself. Special abilities. Blood link, the golem is connected to the host, allowing Asher to share sensory input and issue mental commands instantly. Blood burst, the golem can self-destruct, causing a powerful explosion of condensed blood energy, damaging all enemies within range. One-time use. Asher nodded, satisfied with his new skill. He then turned his attention to another skill in his interface and decided to master it at the perfect level, unlocking a new ability, total assimilation. Meanwhile, Seabass placed his hands on the silver door and began to push it open. As the heavy door creaked aside, they entered yet another forest biome. This one, however, was vastly different from the previous areas. They could see various structures, from treehouses to guarded posts, indicating a level of organization. At the silver level, these little bastards become more intelligent, Seabass explained. They even know how to use magic to build defenses like this with ease. He pointed toward a set of faint markings etched into the surrounding trees. And given these markings, it seems this place is controlled by a goblin shaman, he added, a hint of caution in his voice. Asher scanned the area, taking in the treehouses and watchposts with a calculating gaze. It didn't take long before a few goblins spotted him and rushed in, crude iron weapons at the ready. With a quick flick of his hand, Asher conjured his blood-forged blades, slicing through the goblins with swift, precise movements. As each one fell, their blood gathered into a crimson stream, flowing toward him and merging with his blood orb. Seabass and Emily watched as Asher efficiently took down several goblins, adding their essence to the orb with each kill. Soon, the blood orb was pulsing with enough condensed energy, signaling that he'd gathered the necessary amount. With a steady breath, Asher held the orb in front of him, focusing on his newly acquired skill. Blood Golem, Manifest. The blood orb began to shift and expand, morphing from a dense sphere into a humanoid shape. Slowly, the mass of blood took form, thickening and hardening until a towering golem stood before him, made entirely from the condensed blood he had collected. Its surface pulsed with a dark crimson glow, and faint tendrils of energy wrapped around its limbs, giving it a fierce, almost sentient presence. Seabass raised an eyebrow, impressed by the young master's progress. Remarkable control, young master. The golem is even more solid than I expected for your first attempt. Asher took a moment, testing his connection with the golem through the blood link. He could feel its awareness, sensing his commands even before he spoke them. With a mental command, the golem's arm extended, hardening into a sharp, spear-like form. Asher grinned. This was precisely the power he needed for the Silver Realm. Let's see how you handle this. He directed the golem toward a group of goblins emerging from the trees. The blood-forged creature surged forward, each step heavy and resonant, its attacks swift and merciless. The goblins scrambled, but the golem, driven by Asher's will, tore through them with effortless power. It's quite impressive for your first time, Emily remarked, watching the hulking giant tear through the goblin settlement with ease. Seabass nodded in agreement. Indeed. And it's moving smoothly too. Most people can't control a blood golem this well on the first try, they usually end up imploding it from lack of focus. But Asher frowned slightly, his gaze fixed on the golem. It's not that impressive, it's just a rough version. Without further hesitation, he looked straight at the golem and commanded, "Condense." Under Seabass and Emily's watchful eyes, the massive blood golem began to shrink, its towering form condensing. The once bulky figure morphed into a lean, human-sized build, each muscle and feature refined and tightened. Its hands elongated into slender razor-sharp blades, and its fingers extended into deadly pointed edges. Now, the golem had a menacing, predatory aura, exuding lethal precision rather than brute strength. It moved with a deadly grace, ready to strike with swift and calculated attacks. Asher had condensed the blood golem to preserve its strength while enhancing its agility. The transformation was already showing its worth, as the streamlined golem now cut through the goblins with ruthless efficiency. It was a red blur on the battlefield, moving faster than the eye could follow, its bladed fingers slicing through goblin necks with deadly precision. Seabass and Emily watched in awe as goblins fell one after another, barely aware of the threat before it struck. The golem's speed and power combined seamlessly, making it an unstoppable force in the goblin settlement. As the blood golem continued its assault, Asher observed each movement, his eyes narrowing as he assessed its efficiency. The golem leaped from target to target, its bladed fingers flashing in deadly arcs, severing limbs and ending lives in seconds. Goblins shrieked in terror, some scrambling to flee, only to be intercepted and dispatched with swift, merciless strikes. "Exceptional, young master," Seabass commented, unable to hide his admiration. "You've managed to channel both finesse and power into this construct. Most would struggle to maintain this level of control, especially in the midst of battle." Emily nodded, equally impressed. "It's like watching an artist at work. You're wielding it as if it's part of you." Asher gave a slight smile, though his gaze remained on the field. "It's still far from perfect," he replied, more to himself. "If I can control its movement down to the smallest motion, I'll be able to ensure no wasted energy in any strike. At that, he gave a subtle mental command. In response, the golem's movements became even sharper, each strike perfectly aligned to take down its targets with maximum efficiency and minimal effort. With each kill, a faint red mist rose, drawn into the golem to replenish its energy and sharpen its form. The remaining goblins had no time to react as the golem moved through the field, unstoppable and precise. When the last goblin fell, the golem stood still, awaiting Asher's next command, radiating an aura of dark energy and calm, deadly readiness. Asher took a careful look at the goblin's poisoned weapons, noting the menacing green-black substance smeared over their jagged blades. These goblins didn't come unprepared, he muttered, realizing that even a single cut from these crude weapons could be lethal. A glint of determination sparked in his eyes as he activated total assimilation, this time, targeting his own blade golem. With a subtle command, he directed the skill to draw in the poison from each weapon on the field. Instantly, the toxic essence of the goblin weapons dissolved into a dark mist, which flowed toward the golem, coiling around it before sinking into its form. Every toxic particle fused with the golem's body, enhancing its edges with a dark, lethal gleam. Seabass observed in astonishment, nodding with a proud smile. An impeccable use of assimilation in golem arts. Truly exceptional, young master. Asher looked over his creation, the blade golem now a shimmering weapon of poison and blood. Good, he murmured, pleased with the enhancement. Now, let's see just how deadly you can be. He commanded the golem forward, and with its newly poisoned blades, it became an even more terrifying force. Every slice it delivered now carried a poisonous death, and goblins that barely dodged a strike soon collapsed as even the slightest graze from the golem's edges proved fatal. The battlefield had indeed taken a darker turn, as Asher's golem moved with a new, weaponized power. As the enhanced blade golem surged forward, its poisoned edges now a deadly blur, the goblin's fear became palpable. Any goblin within range was dispatched with brutal efficiency, the slightest graze or cut now spreading poison instantly, causing them to drop in agony before succumbing. The golem's movements were fluid, calculated, and precise, striking without hesitation as if fueled by Asher's own ruthless intent. The remaining goblins attempted to organize, a few of them chanting guttural incantations as dark energy began to swirl in their hands. Shaman goblins, Asher realized, his eyes narrowing. These goblins weren't just fleeing, they were preparing a counterattack. Careful, young master, Seabass warned, recognizing the incoming danger. Those shamans can channel death magic. A single misstep, and the toll could be steep. Asher's eyes flickered with an intense focus. He extended his hand, strengthening his mental link with the blade golem. Let's finish this, he murmured. With a subtle command, he directed the golem to split into 3 smaller, faster forms. Each fragment retained the same poisonous potency and was now agile enough to dodge and weave around the shaman's attacks. Under his guidance, the 3 mini-golems struck with terrifying precision, each targeting a different shaman. The first golem dodged a dark energy bolt, slipping through the defenses to plunge its bladed arm into the shaman's chest. The second spiraled around another shaman's barriers, striking from behind with a lethal swipe, while the third darted between attacks, swiftly dispatching its target. Within moments, the shamans fell, and the rest of the goblins scattered, realizing the futility of fighting. Asher allowed the golems to reassemble into their original form, standing among the fallen as a testament to his control and power. He took a moment, then released the blood from the golem, absorbing it back into his orb as the battlefield grew silent. Seabass and Emily looked at him with newfound respect, recognizing the sheer control and strategy Asher had displayed. Remarkable, young master, Seabass said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Few could wield this level of mastery over such a volatile skill. Then it means there are only weaklings around me, Asher responded coldly, making Seabass close his mouth, while Emily merely shrugged. Anyway, young master, please take this, Seabass said as he handed a book to Asher. What's this? Asher raised his eyebrows, noticing that the book was actually a mana art called Shadowgrave. It's a famous skill in the Supreme Necromancy family, Seabass explained. With it, one can store undead and golems alike. Young master, you can store your creations inside for fast deployment when needed. Asher nodded, taking the book. Young master, do you need to hunt more? Seabass asked. Asher shook his head. No, but I will return later, Asher replied as he began to leave. Seabass bowed and watched him go, silently noting, he is quite like you, my lord, before returning to his work. Did you enjoy your visit here? Emily asked, watching Asher nod in response. Then she grinned. Why don't we try a realm dungeon next? I think you might like it. Asher looked at her with interest. Realm dungeon. Emily nodded eagerly. Yes. It's a place filled with unique challenges and powerful creatures. Plus, the rewards are much greater than the usual areas. Asher's eyes gleamed with intrigue as he considered the possibilities. All right. Let's see what this realm dungeon has to offer. ##. /n. Enjoy my story so far, leave a like and review, it helps. Realm dungeons were fragments of broken worlds, each a remnant preserved by the will of its ancient creator. These worlds, shattered and scattered, held within them a powerful seed, a remnant of their core essence. Over time, this seed absorbed power from the beings it defeated, slowly developing the potential to restore the world to its former glory. However, only the strongest intruders could survive, and many were drawn by the unique treasures and power waiting within. And today, Asher was preparing to enter one of these elusive dungeons, to try them out. Asher stood before the entrance of the realm dungeon, a towering archway covered in dark, twisting vines that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly glow. The air around it was heavy, almost thick, carrying a strange hum that resonated from deep within. Emily and Seabass stood behind him, silent yet watchful. Asher stepped closer, feeling an unfamiliar pressure from within the dungeon, as if it were assessing him, testing his presence. Echoes of battles past lingered in the air, and he could almost sense the remnants of power that had been left behind by defeated intruders. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. These dungeons are different from anything you've seen. They adapt, they counter, and they push back. Be prepared. Seabass added, if you reach the heart, you may encounter the dungeon's core, its seed. Few have managed to obtain it, and the rewards are unlike anything else. Asher gave a short nod, taking in their words. Without looking back, he stepped through the archway and into the realm dungeon. Shadows twisted and curled around him, a dense fog filling the air and hiding whatever lay ahead. Asher moved forward, each step muffled by the thick fog swirling around him. Shapes loomed in the mist, gnarled trees with twisted branches and stones etched with strange markings. The silence was unsettling, broken only by faint, echoing whispers, remnants of voices that seemed to drift in and out of existence. He noticed faint trails of light leading deeper into the dungeon. Following them, he soon entered a clearing where he could make out ancient, crumbling statues positioned in a circle, their stone faces frozen in expressions of rage or despair. Around their bases, thorny vines pulsed as though alive, occasionally sparking with dark energy. Suddenly, a low growl came from the shadows. Asher's eyes narrowed as he saw figures stepping forward, hulking, bestial creatures with misshapen bodies and glowing red eyes. Each held jagged weapons that seemed crudely fashioned yet dangerously sharp, their edges dark with an oily, unnatural sheen. Asher extended his hand, summoning the blood golem. In an instant, the hulking form took shape beside him, its sharpened, poison-tipped edges gleaming in the dim light. The creatures hesitated, but only for a moment. With a guttural roar, they charged. The blood golem surged forward, meeting the first creature head-on. Its bladed arm sliced through the air, severing the creature's arm in a single fluid motion. Poison seeped into the wound, causing the creature to convulse and drop. Without pause, the golem turned, its movements sharp and precise as it cut through the remaining beasts, their bodies falling one by one to the ground. When the last creature lay motionless, Asher glanced around, his gaze settling on an ancient stone door at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by vines. The faint trails of light led directly toward it, pulsing like a heartbeat. The dungeon seemed to guide him, deeper into its secrets and closer to whatever lay at its core. Asher stood in the eerie clearing, his gaze fixed on the ancient stone door partially concealed by thick vines. Despite its dilapidated appearance, the door exuded a faint, unsettling energy that only grew stronger as he approached. The pulse of light leading to it flickered in rhythmic intervals, almost like a beckoning heartbeat. Asher wasn't one to linger, so he gave a single nod to his blood golem, commanding it to follow as he walked toward the door. The closer he came, the more he noticed the intricate details engraved on its stone surface. Scenes of battles long past, of mighty creatures clashing, were carved into the door's heavy panels. At its center, an emblem of an ancient sigil glowed faintly, a coiling serpent devouring its own tail, encircling what looked like a shattered world. He reached out and pressed his hand against the door, feeling the strange energy course through his palm, cold and ancient. With a low rumble, the door creaked open, releasing a wave of musty air from within. Beyond the doorway, the dungeon's interior opened into a massive cavern lined with pillars that spiraled up toward a ceiling shrouded in darkness. Dim orbs of greenish-blue light floated in the air, casting ghostly shadows across the stone floor. The silence was suffocating, yet Asher felt a presence watching him, as if the dungeon itself was alive, observing his every step. He entered the cavern with the blood golem following closely, its dark red form a stark contrast against the cold gray stone. Asher barely had time to take in his surroundings before the faint sounds of movement echoed through the cavern. Shadows gathered along the far wall, and then slowly, figures began to emerge from the darkness. At first, they appeared humanoid, but as they drew closer, he saw they were twisted amalgamations of bones and decay. Shambling skeletons draped in rotting flesh, their eyes hollow yet glowing faintly with a dark light, emerged in rows. They carried weapons covered in rust, their once fine armor now dented and falling apart. Despite their decayed forms, they moved with disturbing coordination, forming a line in front of Asher as if barring his way. With a flick of his wrist, Asher commanded his blood golem forward. The hulking figure charged, moving with surprising speed as it closed the distance between itself and the undead creatures. The first few skeletons fell easily, their bones shattering under the golem's sharp blades. The poisonous essence infused within its weapons seeped into the undead, causing them to crumble into piles of ash with each strike. Yet, as more fell, others seemed to take their place, and soon Asher found himself surrounded. The undead advanced, closing in on him from all directions. Some held rusted swords, others wielded jagged maces, and a few even had shields, forming a tight wall to fend off the golem's blows. Asher clenched his fists, activating his total assimilation ability. He focused on the fallen skeletons around him, drawing in their remaining energy and decay essence. In an instant, dark wisps of mist rose from their bodies, spiraling toward him and merging with his blood golem. The golem's form darkened further, its edges taking on a sharper, more menacing appearance as it absorbed the newfound power. Now, its strikes were swifter, slicing through the undead defenses with lethal precision. The golem, now fully powered by the decayed energy, tore through the remaining undead ranks, leaving broken bones and ash in its wake. As the last of the skeletal creatures fell, silence once again settled over the cavern. Asher took a moment to scan the area, his gaze sharp and wary. He had a feeling that this was only the beginning of what the realm dungeon had in store for him. His suspicions were confirmed when he felt a sudden shift in the air. The ground beneath him trembled, and he instinctively stepped back as a new figure emerged from the shadows, towering over the remnants of the fallen undead. It was a massive, armored knight, its armor blackened and corroded, with cracks running through the metal. The knight's helmet was hollow, yet a pair of burning red eyes glared from within, seething with malevolent intent. The knight raised its weapon, a massive greatsword covered in dark, writhing tendrils that seemed to pulse with life. Asher could feel the intense energy radiating from the sword. It was infused with dark magic, likely powerful enough to rival his own abilities. Not to mention this knight is peak of gold rank from its aura alone, and since it's an humanoid monster, it will be difficult to fight it. But it's good. I was getting bored of small fries. A smile formed on Asher's face as he looked at the newcomer. Without hesitation, Asher commanded his blood golem to engage. The golem charged forward, its movements fluid and deadly, its bladed arms raised to strike. But as it closed in, the knight swung its greatsword with surprising speed, blocking the golem's attack and sending it staggering backward. The impact reverberated through the cavern, echoing off the walls like thunder. Asher narrowed his eyes. This opponent was on a different level than the previous creatures. He extended his hand, feeling the connection to his golem intensify as he pushed more of his mana into it, reinforcing its strength. The golem's form shimmered, its blades sharpening further, and it lunged again, aiming for the knight's exposed joints. The two clashed in a flurry of strikes, each blow more powerful than the last. Sparks flew as metal met darkened blade, and the knight's armor began to show signs of wear, small cracks forming where the golem's attacks had landed. But the knight was relentless, swinging its greatsword in sweeping arcs that forced the golem to dodge and weave to avoid being struck. Realizing he needed a different approach, Asher activated total assimilation once more, drawing in the remnants of the undead energy that lingered in the cavern. This time, he directed it not to strengthen the golem but to infuse it with dark magic. The golem's form shifted, dark tendrils wrapping around its body as it took on a more shadowy, spectral appearance, mirroring the knight's own dark magic. With this newfound power, the golem's movements became faster, almost ethereal. It darted around the knight, striking with blinding speed, each blow landing with precision. The knight staggered, its armor splintering as the golem's attacks began to overwhelm it. In a desperate attempt to counter, the knight raised its greatsword high, summoning dark energy that crackled and surged along the blade. But Asher anticipated the move. With a sharp command, he had the golem lunge forward, bypassing the sword and aiming directly for the knight's exposed helmet. The golem's bladed arm pierced through, striking the source of the knight's burning red eyes. A burst of dark energy erupted from within, and the knight collapsed, its armor clattering to the ground, now lifeless and empty. The cavern fell silent once more, the oppressive energy dissipating as the knight's form crumbled to dust. Asher released his hold on the golem, allowing it to dissolve back into his blood orb, which pulsed faintly as it absorbed the remnants of the battle. He took a moment to survey the scene, feeling a sense of accomplishment tempered by an awareness of the dungeon's remaining depths. Soon, he walked towards the altar which the knight was guarding and then picked the sword on it. It was a rare grade sword, a good one, but Asher has just been gifted with legendary and mythical stuff, so he didn't bother much with it and just stored it away and began to leave. Seabass and Emily waited near the entrance, sensing the shift as the dark energy receded. They watched as Asher emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "The knight?" Emily asked. "Defeated," Asher replied simply, his tone as cold as ever. Seabass nodded approvingly. "You handled it well, young master." That night was the dungeon's first true challenge. Deeper within, the threats will only grow more unpredictable. Asher didn't respond, his gaze drifting toward another faint trail of light leading further into the dungeon. He knew that whatever awaited him would be stronger, more cunning, and that his current abilities might soon be tested to their limits. Without another word, he stepped forward, following the trail, leaving Seabass and Emily to follow in silence. This road also leads to an gold rank monster, but this time it's called Insatiable Wendigo, and he guards a skill book that young master might like, unlike the sword guarded by the knight. Seabass said as Asher nodded, looking forward. "What skill book it is going to be?" "What are the usual skills found here?" Asher asked, knowing there was no fixed record but understanding that a set number of skills circulated each cycle after the guardian was defeated. Like, at one time it could be skill A, the next it might be skill B, then skill C, and then back to skill A. Seabass nodded thoughtfully, understanding Asher's curiosity. "Indeed, young master. The skills found here are part of an ancient cycle, almost like a repeating pattern within the dungeon's core. Although each cycle is unpredictable in exact timing, a handful of specific skills always tend to appear." Emily chimed in, "It's as if the dungeon has a memory of its own, selecting certain abilities that it believes worthy of testing intruders. Some cycles might favor offensive skills, like Shadow Blade or Crimson Slash, while others lean toward defensive or utility abilities like Mana Shield or Spectral Step. There's usually a balance between them." "Do the skills change in strength depending on the cycle?" Asher asked, intrigued. "Yes, to a degree," Seabass answered. "The skills don't necessarily change in power, but the dungeon does adapt to the user's abilities and knowledge. A novice who stumbles upon a powerful offensive skill might receive a slightly weakened version, whereas someone powerful, like you, might find it fully unlocked." Asher absorbed the information, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And the Guardian, it always resets after each cycle, doesn't it?" "Precisely," Seabass confirmed. "The Guardian acts as a key holder, and only by defeating it can you unlock the chamber where these skills lie dormant. Some say that the Guardian itself has access to the skills circulating in that cycle. So the stronger the Guardian, the more valuable the skills it protects." Asher gave a slight nod, his mind already racing with possibilities. The skills offered in the dungeon weren't just random treasures, they were specifically curated, as if testing intruders' strengths and weaknesses. This knowledge made the challenge even more enticing. Without further delay, the three of them moved forward, entering a long corridor that spiraled downward into the depths of the dungeon. The deeper they went, the more the ambient energy thickened, swirling with a dark, foreboding aura. Shadows flickered along the walls, hinting at a latent power that lay just beyond their reach. Eventually, they arrived at a vast hall where an enormous figure stood waiting at its center. The Guardian was unlike anything Asher had encountered so far, a towering beast clad in armor of jagged obsidian, its eyes gleaming with a fiery intelligence. It held a massive scythe, blackened with an eerie glow, each swing releasing an unsettling aura that lingered in the air like a toxic fog. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "It's a Soul Reaver, one of the higher-tier Guardians." Asher's eyes gleamed with anticipation, his fingers itching with the urge to test his skills against the formidable creature. The Soul Reaver stood perfectly still in the center of the chamber, its glowing eyes locked onto Asher as if sensing his power. Its scythe gleamed with a dark energy, faint wisps of spectral light trailing from its blade. Around them, the shadows thickened, as if the dungeon itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Asher's blood orb hovered beside him, its crimson hue contrasting sharply against the dark atmosphere of the hall. He glanced at it, an idea forming as he weighed his options. Seabass leaned forward. "Be cautious, young master. The Soul Reaver has a unique ability to sap vitality through its scythe. A single hit can drain a portion of your energy." Asher gave a nod but remained focused on his own plan. "Let's see if it can handle my blood golem first," he said calmly. With a mere thought, he sent a command to the orb, and immediately, the crimson substance poured out of it, morphing and coalescing into the menacing figure of his newly modified golem. The blood golem, now slender and agile from Asher's earlier adjustments, moved with an almost predatory grace, its blade-like fingers extended as it approached the Soul Reaver. Its surface shimmered with the dark toxin it had assimilated earlier, now weaponized into a lethal advantage. The Soul Reaver tilted its head, its eerie gaze never leaving Asher. Then, in a blur of movement, it swung its scythe toward the golem, aiming to slice it in half. But the golem dodged, its movements fluid and precise, darting around the guardian as if reading its every move. Asher watched intently, assessing his creation's performance. The golem was agile, striking at the Soul Reaver's armor with swift, poison-laced attacks. Each time it landed a hit, faint black cracks appeared on the guardian's armor, the poison seeping into the metal, eating away at its defenses. Yet, the Soul Reaver barely reacted, each strike only seeming to infuriate it more. Then, with a roar, the guardian released a shockwave of dark energy, forcing the blood golem back. Asher felt the backlash through his connection with the creature but kept control, urging it forward once more. This time, he sent an additional command, muttering under his breath, "Condense and pierce." The blood golem's form shrank again, its fingers elongating into narrow needle-like blades as it surged toward the Soul Reaver. With its leaner form, it moved faster than before, slipping past the guardian's defenses to plunge its blades deep into the armor's weak points. The poison seeped in faster now, its dark sheen spreading across the guardian's chest and arms as the golem delivered one strike after another. The decay poison on it can now harm even spectral figures, as Asher has also assimilated the vengeful spirit oil, and he has assimilated it in his own blood and not in this golem, so now, each drop of Asher blood can induce madness and soul damage in anyone weaker than him or equal to him. Impressive control, Seabass murmured. Few can manage a blood golem so effectively, let alone enhance it mid-battle. Emily smiled, watching Asher with admiration. And he's not even done yet. Asher, unrelenting, decided to step in himself. He summoned his own blade, a dark weapon that pulsed with energy in sync with his heartbeat. As he approached the Soul Reaver, the guardian turned its attention from the golem to him, seemingly recognizing a greater threat. The Soul Reaver raised its scythe, readying itself for a final devastating blow. Asher's eyes narrowed, and he activated total assimilation once more, focusing on the dark energy radiating from the Soul Reaver's scythe. As the skill took effect, he could feel the sinister aura of the scythe flowing into his own weapon, coating it in the same spectral energy. His blade now pulsed with a lethal dark radiance, mirroring the Soul Reaver's own weapon. The original black assimilation developed by Black Magnus could only assimilate the non-own things, but after system perfection, Asher can now even steal a living person blood without his approval. This is the power of now fully perfected total assimilation. With a swift, calculated movement, Asher lunged, his blade clashing against the guardian's scythe. Dark energy erupted from the impact, crackling through the air as both combatants pushed against each other. The Soul Reaver's strength was immense, but Asher held his ground, his skill and control matching the creature's brute power. Then, in a fluid motion, Asher twisted his blade and broke the lock, sliding his weapon along the guardian's scythe to deliver a swift strike across its chest. The dark energy from total assimilation seeped into the guardian's armor, amplifying the damage inflicted by the blood golem's poison. The guardian staggered, its scythe lowering as it struggled to maintain its stance. Seeing his chance, Asher summoned the blood golem once more, commanding it to launch a final attack. The golem leaped onto the guardian, its slender fingers plunging deep into the already weakened armor. Poison flooded into the Soul Reaver's core, its body convulsing as the toxic energy spread rapidly. With a shudder, the guardian let out a guttural roar, then collapsed, its body dissolving into a dark mist as it succumbed to the combined onslaught. Asher stepped back, watching as the mist faded, leaving behind a single glowing orb, the essence of the Soul Reaver. Seabass nodded approvingly. A flawless execution, young master. You've truly mastered the art of synergy with your blood golem. Emily clapped, a gleam of excitement in her eyes. Now that was something. You didn't just beat it with your summon, but you also displayed your own sword power. Asher ignored their praise, his focus on the glowing orb left by the guardian's demise. He reached out, feeling the power emanating from it. This was what he had come for, the skill reward from defeating a guardian of the realm dungeon. As he absorbed the orb, a notification appeared in his mind. You have acquired, Shadow Scythe, grants the ability to summon a spectral scythe, imbued with a fraction of the Soul Reaver's power. Can drain life essence from enemies on impact. A smile formed on Asher's lips for a second as he absorbed the new skill. The power felt like a perfect fit, an extension of his own abilities, blending seamlessly with his fighting style. Does host wish to perfect the Shadow Scythe? Asher nodded as he used the skill points gained to perfect it, turning it from an uncommon skill to rare skill. Nether Scythe skill acquired. Seabass observed him with a nod. That skill suits you well, young master. It's both powerful and versatile, just like your blood golem. You could achieve even greater feats with it. Emily stepped forward, giving Asher an encouraging pat on his shoulder.
So, where to next?
This place is practically full of opportunities for you to pick up more skills like that. Asher considered this, his mind racing with possibilities. There's no need to rush. I'll master what I have now. This new skill, combined with my golem, will give me an edge I haven't fully tested yet. Seabass bowed slightly, understanding.
A wise decision, young master.
Mastery is often more powerful than sheer accumulation and versatility. Master this dungeon is also famous, Seabass said as he showed pic of another dungeon. It's called Infinity Tower. Asher studied the screen intently, taking in every detail about the new Infinity Tower. The concept intrigued him, an endless tower, filled with floors that each connected to real dungeons. It was a perfect opportunity to gain power and skills, but also a clear reminder of the stakes involved. One wrong step, one moment of carelessness, could be fatal. But for Asher, the challenge was exactly what he needed. An endless climb. Each level a new challenge, he muttered, the corners of his mouth lifting in a small, calculating smile. He scrolled through the description, intrigued by the possibilities it presented. The ability to face a new type of dungeon each time he advanced through the Infinity Tower was like a personal training ground, tailored to push him beyond his limits. More than that, it offered a structure to his power growth, granting him a guaranteed reward for every 10 floors. He couldn't deny the appeal of such a clear path to growth, though he knew the risks.
One life. One chance.
The system made it clear there would be no retries in this tower, no do-overs if he failed. He would have to be prepared, perfectly in sync with his abilities, and ready for any challenge. He tapped on the tower's icon, observing the shimmering portal that materialized in the air in front of him, a doorway waiting to be opened. For now, though, he closed it. This new mission could wait until he had a better understanding of his recently gained skills. The fight against the Soul Reaver had shown him where his abilities excelled, but also hinted at areas where he could improve. I will see it later, Asher said as Seabass nodded. That is good, you can go to it from Academy 2. Asher nodded as he went back with Emily. As reaching home, he went to his room as he just checked his own gains while he waited for Emily to cook for him. After half an hour, Asher rose from his seat, drawn by the smell of breakfast drifting through the hall. Emily had likely already prepared something, so he headed out, his mind still half focused on the tower's possibilities. In the dining room, Emily set down a plate of steaming eggs, toast, and sliced fruit with a proud smile. Thought you'd need some proper fuel after yesterday's excursion, she said with a wink. She also poured a cup of tea, placing it beside Asher's plate as she nodded approvingly. A hearty meal will do you good, young master. Next time you can continue to clear the endless tomb and get many good skills and items from there. It had been over a month since Asher had ventured into the Endless Tomb dungeon, a place that had tested him like never before. He had emerged with greater power and a renewed focus on mastering his skills, spending countless hours refining his techniques. During that time, he hadn't been idle. Every day had been devoted to training, honing his blood golem manipulation, improving his shadow scythe's control, and testing the limits of his new abilities. He also made sure to study any weaknesses in his techniques, ensuring each skill was both versatile and refined. Now, Asher found himself back in the Grand Hall, the same place where he had once awakened his core. He stood, surrounded by the ethereal glow of magical energy that hung thick in the air, giving the room a sense of ancient power. Memories of that day washed over him as he looked around, recalling how he had first felt the surge of energy that marked his awakening. It had been a powerful moment, one that had set him on his current path of relentless growth. Like him, many others had also gathered, summoned today by the elders. As the time for the meeting approached and the gates closed, Elder James appeared and addressed everyone. You are all now in the Foundation realm. Many of you are at the bronze rank within it, while others have reached the iron rank, he said, glancing around to ensure everyone was listening. This display of talent shows that you all have the potential to be great, he continued, pausing briefly as he scanned the crowd. And today, you will begin the journey to the World Academy. However, not everyone here may enter. It is a place reserved for the exceptional, and only those who exceed expectations will be accepted. But remember, he said with emphasis, we expect you to give it your best, to never falter, and to push beyond your limits. With a wave of his hand, a portal materialized behind him. This portal will lead you all to the entrance of the academy. Go on, all of you. The crowd nodded, and one by one, they began stepping through the portal, each with determination etched on their faces. As Asher stepped through the portal, he found himself in a place unlike anything he had ever seen. The sky above was painted in shades of orange and pink, with wisps of clouds drifting lazily across, creating a surreal landscape that felt almost dreamlike. The sun cast a warm, soft glow over everything, intensifying the vibrant colors of the realm. He looked down to see that he was standing on what seemed to be grass but was unlike any grass he had encountered. It was a soft, emerald hue, each blade giving off a faint, comforting glow, as though alive with a gentle energy. The ground felt soft underfoot, almost cloud-like, making it seem as though he were walking on air rather than solid earth. In the distance, a grand gate rose into view, its towering structure made from a glass-like material that sparkled in the light, casting prismatic reflections across the grassy field. Between him and the gate lay a winding path, crafted from smooth, translucent stones that shimmered like crystal. The road was lined with radiant flowers in an array of colors, swaying as though greeting the new arrivals with each breeze. Other students could be seen in the distance, all moving towards the gate with a mixture of awe and determination on their faces. The place had a serene quality, yet there was an underlying feeling of anticipation, as if the very air itself was brimming with the energy of past accomplishments and the promise of challenges yet to come. Asher took a breath, feeling a thrill course through him. This was the entrance to the legendary World Academy, a place where only the strongest, the most talented, and the most determined could thrive. He stepped forward, his eyes set on the gleaming gate, ready for whatever awaited him within its walls. But despite their efforts, no one could push the massive gate open. Some students tried to strike it, launching attacks in frustration, but their strikes didn't leave so much as a scratch on the gate's shimmering surface. "Leave it alone, fools," a voice boomed, echoing across the clearing. "You will not find these gates so easily opened." Everyone turned to the source of the voice, eyes widening in shock as they noticed two immense eyes glowing a fierce green within the smooth reflective surface of the gate. A mouth formed beneath the eyes, twisting into an expression of disdain as it gazed down at them. "Only when the time is right will I grant you entrance," the gate's voice continued, its tone dripping with contempt. "You think you can brute force your way through? Only those worthy of the academy will cross this threshold. Test your patience, your discipline, and prove you belong here." A tense silence fell over the crowd as the students exchanged uncertain looks. Asher stood silently, his gaze fixed on the gate's gleaming eyes. This gate was no ordinary barrier, it had a consciousness, and it seemed to judge them by more than just strength. Minutes turned into hours, and the sky above shifted unexpectedly from the warm tones of a cloudy day to the deep, dark hues of midnight. Stars dotted the sky, casting a faint glow over the field as the students waited, tense and restless. "Now, let me introduce myself," the gate announced, breaking the silence. Its voice was firm and resonant, filling the air with an almost tangible authority. "I am the shield of the World Academy, Sir Vader, the guardian and unbreakable wall." It paused, its green eyes narrowing with a hint of disdain. "I am also your tester, the judge of new blood."
TSK, TSK, such impatience, it scoffed.
"But here we are, finally ready." As the eyes disappeared, a dense mist began to gather, swirling around the gate and obscuring it entirely. From within the mist, a massive, ethereal black-blue head materialized, its piercing gaze sweeping over the assembled students. It hovered mid-air, emanating a cold aura that sent a chill through everyone present. "Face me if you wish to pass," the figure announced, its voice echoing like a dark incantation. "Only those with resolve and the strength to endure will be permitted through these gates." "What is the test?" asked a beautiful girl with golden blonde hair and small, curious eyes. The misty figure turned its intense gaze toward the girl, its glowing eyes narrowing with interest. "The test," it began, its voice low and resonant, "is not a simple trial of brute force. You will face illusions, fears, and obstacles that will push your mental and physical limits." The figure's dark blue form flickered as it gestured toward the gate behind it. "You must each walk the path alone. Your strength, wit, and resilience will be judged in ways you cannot anticipate. Those who prove worthy will find the gate open for them at the end of their journey." A murmur spread through the gathered students as they exchanged nervous glances. Some looked apprehensive, while others, like Asher, remained steady and determined. "Begin," the figure commanded, its voice booming as the mist parted. A dark passage stretched out from the base of the gate, lined with shimmering, ethereal flames that cast an eerie light. One by one, the students began stepping forward, each disappearing into the misty path. When it was Asher's turn, he took a deep breath and moved toward the entrance, his eyes sharp and focused, ready to face whatever awaited him. Sir Vader, the ancient guardian of the academy gate, watched intently as the young, ambitious students approached, one by one, ready to step into his domain. On the outside, he appeared as a simple gate, solid and unmoving, but in reality he was a sentient being, a realm gatekeeper connected to a treacherous plane known as the Den of Nightmares. This was no ordinary test of skill, it was an ordeal crafted to challenge each entrant's resilience, wit, and courage. The Den of Nightmares was a labyrinthine realm, half-formed from the remnants of forgotten worlds and brimming with horrors that took shape from one's innermost fears. No two paths were the same, for each illusion, each winding corridor, and each shadowy creature was molded from the subconscious mind of the challenger. To pass through to the academy, the students needed more than raw power, they needed the mental fortitude to face their darkest fears head-on. As each young aspirant entered, servitors' keen awareness swept over them, sensing the unique essences they brought. This year's class was impressive, brimming with talent from the academy's most distinguished families. He took particular interest in a few of the entrants, those who came from bloodlines of power and prestige, each possessing a legacy as well as a reputation. Ah, 3 terrors from the Magnus family this year, he noted, a trace of admiration in his voice. The terrors, known for their mastery over several abilities, possessed the uncanny ability to manipulate blood, a skill that could either confuse the creatures within the den or bend the very nightmares themselves. Magnus heirs were trained to weaponize fear, a useful skill within the den. Then came the Hellflame's ability family, the fierce and resilient hounds. Known for their fearsome destructive abilities, strength and combat instincts, these young members of the Hellflame clan entered with heads held high and an unshakable resolve. 2 hounds this year, Surveyor mused with a low chuckle. They were known to be relentless hunters and well prepared for the physical dangers lurking in the shadows of the maze. They were like predators, the second most feared family after the Magnus household. Their flames had the power to burn souls, and they were notorious for torturing their targets by slowly roasting their souls until the victims died from unbearable pain. Hence the name hounds, nightmarish creatures from hell, known for their relentlessness. The Hellion family took pride in this reputation. They found the name fitting, a perfect emblem of their ruthless nature and unwavering pursuit of their targets. Behind them, 2 students from the Necromancer family of Black family, known as the Deathseekers, passed through the gate, each bearing a dark aura. Necromancy was a skill feared by many, but the Deathseekers embraced it. They had learned to manipulate life and death, summoning the spirits of the dead or controlling spectral entities. Within the den, they would face both the lure of their dark powers and the temptation of controlling the very nightmares they encountered. Finally, he sensed the Golden Sword clan's heirs, the Saints. He felt 3 of them enter, each radiating a holy energy that flickered like pure light through his consciousness. Saints were renowned for their mastery of defensive magic and their immunity to most forms of dark influence. Though their power was traditionally used to protect, he wondered how they would fare in a place where their own fears would be weaponized against them. Then there were others, the Sea Kings from the Riverdale family, the Thors from the Indra family, the Deatheyes from the Artemis family, the Loki from the Darius family, the Druids of the Enrose family, and last but not least, the Ironblood from the Dagon family. Each family had sent an average of 2 elites, making this year's gathering especially formidable. Only once a year were these elites presented, yet this time, the number of representatives from each family was unusually high. An elite group indeed, Surveyor thought with satisfaction. Each of these families has brought their best, let's see how far they'll go. As he closed his eyes, he willed his consciousness to expand into the endless sky of his realm, where shadows and terrors awaited in anticipation. The maze within was shifting, forming endless pathways and hidden traps. Shadows flickered in the dark, while creatures began to take shape, feral, vicious entities, each crafted from the latent fears of the entrants themselves. In this realm, the fears took form as nightmares, giant, predatory beasts, sinister specters and eerie, disembodied voices that whispered anxieties and doubts. "Come," he whispered as his voice echoed through the maze. "Let's see what nightmares you bring to life." Surveyor wasn't the only one watching this gathering. Numerous teachers and veteran warriors, known as Old Monsters, observed the trial intently, eager to assess new talent and potentially pass down their skills. This year, 6 of these formidable figures had emerged from seclusion, stirred by curiosity and excitement to see which students could capture their attention. The academy's current principal stood among them, gazing over the scene. His expression wavered between awe and apprehension. Damn it, he thought, no wonder that old man was so eager to hand down the principal's position. His mind wandered back to the previous headmaster, a legendary figure of unmatched strength. Although powerful in his own right, the principal knew he'd barely last 10 moves in a direct duel with his predecessor. The memory sent a chill down his spine, making him subconsciously tense up. The principal continued to survey the crowd, a mix of eagerness and tension in his gaze as he mentally catalogued the students. This year's intake was the most promising he'd seen in years, with each family sending not only their top heirs but also their elite warriors and specialized talents. Near the front of the group, the Sea Kings from the Riverdale family stood tall and composed, their eyes reflecting the endless depths of the sea. Known for their water-based combat techniques and ability to control aquatic beasts, they had an aura of fluid strength that made them formidable in both open water and on land. Nearby were the elite Thors from the Indra family, their gazes intense as they wielded thunderous energy that crackled subtly around their forms. To those around them, even the faintest glance felt like standing under a storm cloud, charged and ready to strike. Across from them stood the Death Eyes from the Artemis family, renowned for their archery and mastery of shadow techniques. Their quiet, intense presence sent shivers down the spines of those who passed them. The infamous Loki twins from the Darius family lounged casually nearby, appearing indifferent yet exuding a mischievous aura. The Druid of Enrose was surrounded by faintly glowing plants and woodland creatures that seemed to appear and vanish around him, displaying a mystic connection to nature that fascinated those who watched. Finally, there were the Iron Bloods from the Dagon family, whose hardened expressions and crimson armor bespoke their legacy as warriors of ruthless strength. Known for their impenetrable defenses and regenerative abilities, they were considered nearly impossible to defeat in close-range combat. The principal sighed, feeling a familiar nervous energy coursing through him. This year was a gamble. These were powerful individuals, each with their own legacy and ambitions, and any one of them could tip the delicate balance of the academy. He knew that the other teachers felt the same anticipation, and even the venerable old monsters in attendance, who typically reserved their interest for seasoned fighters, seemed impressed by the aura of strength filling the courtyard. A murmur ran through the crowd as a sudden gust of wind swept through the arena, sending a flurry of leaves dancing across the grass. The old monsters straightened, their eyes narrowing as they felt the air crackle with latent power. The principal could see it in their faces. Each of them was searching for that rare spark, the hint of a prodigy who could inherit their skill, their secrets, perhaps even their legacy. At the far end of the hall, Sir Vader grinned, his massive stone face somehow conveying a twisted excitement as he began to address the students again. You stand before the den of nightmares, a realm within me, a space of relentless trial and reflection. It is here that I test each one of you, your intellect, strength, and most importantly, your will. The students listened, some with growing anticipation, others with apprehension. Sir Vader continued, inside, you will face the maze of nightmares, where your deepest fears will be your greatest enemy. No amount of brute strength will save you alone. You must strategize, endure, and find the courage to confront whatever haunts you most. His stony face broke into a predatory grin. Those who emerge on the other side will have the honor of joining the academy. Fail, and you will return to your families in disgrace. A few of the students exchanged glances, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. Others showed visible signs of nervousness, the weight of their family expectations pressing down on them. Servitor's eyes scanned them all, his expression unreadable, and then he gave a final nod. The students stepped forward one by one, entering the gate that would lead them into the den of nightmares. Inside the maze, Asher's senses heightened as he took in his surroundings. Shadows flickered along the walls, and whispers echoed faintly in the distance. Though he kept his steps steady, his heart beat faster, aware that something sinister was waiting within the labyrinth. Asher pushed forward, his breath slow and deliberate, each step echoing faintly down the narrow, twisting corridors of the maze. Shadows danced along the stone walls, shifting and blending in ways that played tricks on his vision. It was as if the very walls themselves were breathing, contracting and expanding with the steady rhythm of a living creature. Each step he took seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, leaving no trace behind, as if the path behind him were vanishing, leaving him isolated in an endless void. The atmosphere was oppressive, weighing down on him as if the air had thickened into a substance he had to wade through. But it wasn't just the physical sensation that gnawed at him, it was the relentless assault on his mind. The voices seemed to come from every direction, intangible yet razor-sharp, whispering fears, doubts, and insecurities he had never voiced. They rose and fell in a discordant chorus, sometimes loud and jarring, sometimes soft, almost seductive. Asher. One voice murmured, dripping with disdain. What makes you think you're worthy? Do you think you're special? Every step you take is just delaying the inevitable, another hissed, taunting him. You're alone, Asher, always alone. Abandoned by your own mother, oh poor Asher. He gritted his teeth, his jaw clenched as he tried to drown out the words, reminding himself they were just illusions. But the maze was cunning, and it knew exactly where to strike. Each whisper clawed at old wounds, dredging up fears and memories he thought he had left behind. Flashes of faces he hadn't seen in years flickered before him, some familiar, others twisted beyond recognition. Friends, family, mentors, all stared at him with eyes that gleamed with disappointment, disgust, or worse, indifference. Despite the taunts and the shadows, Asher steadied his focus. He knew that if he let his mind slip, even for a second, the maze would seize upon it, tightening its grip and driving him into madness. The instructors had warned them. Those who broke under the pressure of the den of nightmares were often changed, haunted by lingering fears even after they escaped. As he walked, he ran through mental exercises, cataloging the layout of the path he was following, counting his steps, memorizing turns. It was a technique he'd trained in during countless hours of endurance training, grounding his mind in logical patterns to counter the illusory attacks. He knew that logic and resilience were his greatest allies here. Yet the maze was relentless. With each twist and turn, he felt a rising sense of dread, as if he were spiraling deeper into something ancient and unknowable. The whispers became laughter, mocking his every attempt to push forward, to hold his ground. Flickering images of failure sprang up in his mind. Visions of defeat, of lost battles, of endless darkness stretching out before him, cold and eternal. A faint glow appeared in the distance, drawing his attention. He tensed, unsure if it was a trap or a possible exit. He moved toward it cautiously, each step deliberate and measured. As he neared, the light resolved into a faint figure, a baby version of himself, standing in the center of a small clearing. The boy looked up at him, eyes wide with innocence but filled with a haunting sadness. "Why did you leave me?" the child asked, his voice soft but piercing. Asher froze, his breath catching in his throat. He knew this was part of the test, yet the sight of his younger self, vulnerable and hurt, struck a chord that resonated painfully. It felt too real, too vivid, dredging up memories he'd buried. I didn't abandon you," Asher whispered, though his voice sounded hollow, even to himself. The child stared at him, silent for a moment before a smirk twisted across his face, transforming the look of sadness into something far more sinister. "Then why do you carry so much guilt?" The voice morphed, blending into that same chorus of whispers that had taunted him earlier, now mingling with cruel laughter. Asher felt his heartbeat pause at the words, and a memory flashed before his eyes, a memory he had always wanted to forget but could never quite escape. It was a memory from his previous life, sharp and haunting, a reminder of something he wished he could erase from his mind. But here it was, vivid and real. How was this possible? He couldn't help but wonder, what is happening here? Just how powerful was this place, that it could even unearth memories from his past life? Asher's breath hitched as the memory washed over him, vivid and relentless, far too real to simply be a trick of the mind. The shadows shifted, weaving around him like tendrils as his surroundings faded, replaced by scenes from a past he'd worked so hard to bury. In front of him was a scene he knew all too well, a cold, silent night, the flickering light of torches casting an ominous glow. He could almost feel the damp chill of the air, smell the scent of smoke and iron. It was the night everything had fallen apart. A betrayal, a desperate decision, and the faces of those he'd left behind, people who had once trusted him, looked up to him, haunted his vision. He had tried to move forward, to shed that part of himself, but no matter how far he went, the memory followed him, like a shadow he could never shake. Asher's hands clenched into fists. It shouldn't be possible, he muttered, feeling the weight of the den's power pressing down on him. The maze wasn't just testing his fears, it was dredging up his past, prying into memories and traumas that weren't supposed to follow him into this life. He could feel it, like a living force wrapping around his mind, probing his deepest regrets, unraveling the threads of his very soul. "Why did you leave?" The child's voice echoed again, sharper, colder. "You could have saved them, yet you ran." The words stung, not just for their cruelty but because they echoed his own buried doubts. Asher's heart pounded as he took a step back, steadying himself. "I did what I had to," he whispered, but even he could hear the wavering in his voice. The shadows twisted again, shifting into the faces of those he'd failed. Their expressions were hollow, empty, eyes locked onto him with an intensity that felt all too real. He wanted to turn away, but something held him there, forcing him to confront them. For a moment, he felt like he was drowning in their silent accusations, as if the weight of his guilt alone was pulling him under. But Asher closed his eyes, steadying himself. When he opened them, the child's smile had twisted into a monstrous grin as it lunged toward him, aiming to bite at his neck. In a swift move, Asher sidestepped, and blood leaked from his wrist, forming a blade that gleamed with a metallic sheen. With precision, he swung it at the creature, and the blade cleaved the child in two, ending the nightmare in a single decisive strike. Asher steadied his breath, his blood blade dripping as the remnants of the creature evaporated into wisps of dark smoke. He clenched his hand, watching the metallic sheen slowly fade from the weapon as it reabsorbed back into his body. Despite the unsettling attack, he felt a strange surge of confidence. The darkness here might know his fears, but it couldn't overpower his will to survive. The shadows around him seemed to pulsate with a low, thrumming energy, sensing his resolve, as if they were waiting for his next move. He knew the maze wasn't done with him yet, this was only the beginning. A faint chuckle echoed from the walls, deep and haunting, as if mocking his small victory.
Asher's jaw clenched.
"Bring whatever you have," he muttered under his breath, his eyes sharp and alert. He was done letting memories drag him down. Whatever the den of nightmares could throw at him, he would face it head-on. "I've been haunted by it for a whole 30 years. Do you really think it affects me now?" Asher asked, chuckling. But soon, the chuckle twisted into morbid laughter, the kind that only a madman might emit.
"Aha ha 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 ha.
"Let's see what your true color is," he sneered, his voice laced with a new, unsettling edge. A hidden personality, buried deep within, began to surface, drawn out by the traumatic memories and past shadows that had haunted him. It was a side he had knowledge of, but what he didn't know was that it has been carried in this world too. Asher's laughter echoed in the dark corridors, each sound reverberating with an almost chilling vibrancy. The maze seemed to respond, the shadows thickening, warping as if provoked by the dormant madness now surfacing within him. His eyes glinted with a dangerous light, his gaze sharper, his stance more primal. The specters of his past edged closer, their forms shifting between familiar faces and nameless, haunting visages. But something had changed. There was no fear, no hesitation. Instead, a cold, unrestrained confidence enveloped him. With a flick of his wrist, Asher's blood manifested into a metallic sheen, forming a deadly weapon. The blade hummed with a deadly aura, as if feeding off his unleashed energy. The twisted spirits lunged, their forms more feral, clawing at him with desperate hands, but Asher was quicker. He danced through their attacks with an eerie calm, his blade slicing through each spirit like a scythe through fog, leaving nothing but faint wisps of darkness in his wake. "You're all just shadows," he spat, eyes narrowed. "Ghosts of a past I buried long ago." As he moved deeper, the darkness only thickened, and with it, the whispers intensified, now mingling with faint screams, laughter and memories of long-forgotten faces. The maze was pulling everything it could to break him, to drag him down into the abyss of his own mind. But instead of weakening, Asher's aura grew sharper, more refined, his hidden personality pushing through with an almost demonic vigor. He relished in the twisted challenge, each specter he sliced down leaving him with an exhilarating sense of triumph. The maze, sensing his resolve, shifted again, twisting around him until he found himself in an open clearing lit by a single beam of cold moonlight. In the center stood a shadowy figure, tall, featureless, yet exuding an undeniable power. Its presence was suffocating, a reminder of every enemy, every rival he'd ever faced. It was the final test, the maze's ultimate manifestation of his fear. Asher smirked, his grip tightening on his blade. "I've seen worse, but I have to say you got the ugliest face," he murmured, his voice low and edged with challenge. Without waiting, he charged, his form blurring as he closed the distance, blade aimed straight at the figure's core. The shadow met him with equal speed, parrying his attack with an unseen force, their clash creating a shockwave that rippled through the clearing. They fought in a deadly dance, a blur of strikes and counters, each movement calculated, each step filled with lethal intent. Asher felt himself pushed beyond his limits, his hidden self thriving in the thrill of combat, matching the shadow blow for blow, adapting to every move it made. After what felt like an eternity, Asher saw his opening. His blade gleamed with a dark red energy, channeling every ounce of his strength and rage. With a final savage swing, he cleaved through the figure, watching as it dissolved into wisps of shadow that faded into the night. As he caught his breath, the maze began to dissolve, the oppressive darkness lifting. He stood alone in the clearing, the moonlight illuminating his blood-stained form, his eyes reflecting a cold satisfaction. Asher felt his pulse steady, his breath settling into an eerie calm as he advanced further into the maze. Now his steps were unhurried, deliberate, his gaze unwavering as he navigated through the winding corridors, each one darker and more twisted than the last. The maze seemed to sense the shift in him, adapting to his newfound ruthlessness. The walls writhed, oozing with shadowy tendrils that whispered promises of doom and despair. Every so often, shrieks echoed through the air, agonizing cries for help. At first, they were distant, haunting yet ignorable. But soon he stumbled upon the scenes themselves, people trapped pleading, faces contorted in fear and desperation. The first person he encountered was a young boy, crouched against the wall, his face streaked with tears, eyes wide with terror. He looked up as Asher approached, reaching out a trembling hand. "Please, please help me," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible, his face a picture of sheer vulnerability. Asher's eyes flickered over him, his expression unreadable. The boy's pleas grew frantic, his voice cracking with desperation. Asher paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the boy, but instead of extending a hand or offering words of comfort, he simply stepped around him, continuing on his path. Behind him, the boy's cries faded, replaced by a chilling silence that only deepened the darkness. Further into the maze, Asher came upon a woman clutching her leg, her clothes tattered, her face pale as she clutched a makeshift tourniquet. She reached out with one hand, desperation in her eyes as she recognized him as her only chance of salvation. "Please, I just need a little help. Just help me stand, that's all." Her voice wavered, filled with both hope and dread. Asher's expression didn't change. He looked down at her with the same cold indifference, as though she were no more than another shadow on his path. With a silent glance, he walked on, leaving her behind. Her voice echoed in the maze, growing softer and softer until it, too, was swallowed by silence. Every encounter became a twisted reflection of his resolve, each desperate plea a chance to reaffirm his choice. Some people, injured and terrified, clutched at him, others simply looked up in silent despair. But Asher's steps never faltered. His heart, once weighed down by guilt and empathy, felt lighter, replaced by a single-minded determination that left no room for anything else. The maze seemed to twist and writhe, the air growing colder, shadows stretching longer as if it could sense his hardened resolve. The path ahead began to shift, and he found himself in a massive, open space, a forest blanketed in mist, with gnarled trees that cast long, twisted shadows. In the distance, faint figures moved, their shapes distorted and unnatural, but none dared approach him. Finally, he reached the center of the maze. A lone figure stood there, draped in darkness, its form flickering between monstrous and human. It watched him with eyes that seemed to pierce into his soul, a silent challenge lingering in its gaze. The figure leapt forward, its claws a blur of darkness slashing through the air. Asher shifted his weight, sidestepping with precise timing, eyes sharp as he tracked the creature's every movement. With a fluid counter, he struck back, his blade slicing through the figure's arm. Shadows spilled from the wound, curling around his weapon before dispersing into the mist. The creature, undeterred, lunged again, its attacks growing fiercer, each movement more rapid and unpredictable. They circled each other, each strike meeting with another in a clash of shadow and steel. Asher's focus narrowed, every swing of his blade matched the creature's relentless fury. Shadows twisted around his blade, the edge cutting cleanly through each attack, leaving only wisps of darkness in its wake. His strikes became merciless, his steps confident as he calculated every opening, slicing through the creature with deadly accuracy. The red energy pulsed from his weapon with each swing, his strikes carrying a brutal force that drove the creature back, inch by inch. The creature let out a deep guttural growl, its eyes narrowing before launching forward in one final attempt, claws aimed straight for his chest. Asher held his ground, his blade ready. He lunged as the creature did, his weapon piercing its core with a single precise strike, cleaving upward as he cut through the writhing shadows. The creature froze, a horrific scream tearing through the air as it began to dissolve, breaking apart into thin tendrils of shadow that faded into the mist around him. Asher straightened, his gaze unwavering as he looked down at his blood-stained blade, its dark energy still lingering. The maze faded, the fog lifting to reveal an empty clearing bathed in a cold light. Asher remained still, his breath steady, his expression unreadable as he took in his surroundings. Every part of him felt sharpened, his focus honed, as he prepared for whatever waited beyond. "You know," Asher muttered, sidestepping another claw swipe with eerie calm. "I was just watching the scenes from the outside, all those little memories. That pathetic me, waiting around for that woman, calling herself my mother." A twisted smile crept onto his face as he slashed his blade across the creature's chest, shadowy tendrils spilling from the wound. He tilted his head, his eyes never leaving the creature. "Tell me," he asked, his tone a mix of mockery and bitterness, "do I look like I need a mother's love?" The creature faltered for a split second, something like fear flickering in its dark eyes as it processed the look in Asher's gaze, the look of someone who was done with being haunted by the past. Its claws lashed out in response, but Asher easily sidestepped, each movement as if he were dancing around a toy, indifferent to any threat it posed. "I grew tired of sitting quietly and watching. But this place," he continued, his voice almost a whisper, "it brought out what I buried, the trauma I needed to deal with." His blade gleamed as he raised it again, eyes narrowing with the thrill of finally confronting his demons head-on. "Thanks for helping me get rid of it, I meant the goody two-shoes me." The creature hissed, the shadows around it flaring wildly, but Asher barely flinched. He was in complete control, each step closing the distance between them, each strike deliberate and merciless. The creature's claws slashed through the air in a frenzied attempt to defend itself, yet every desperate move was met by Asher's blade with unyielding precision. Asher's blade sliced clean through one of the creature's arms, severing it in an explosion of shadow. It stumbled, a hollow, distorted sound escaping from where a mouth might have been, as if it could sense its impending end. "As if you could ever intimidate me," he sneered, advancing with slow, deliberate steps. The creature backed away, its twisted form shrinking, clawing at the air as if hoping to escape the merciless human stalking toward it. Asher grinned, savoring the moment. Raising his blade, he let it pulse with that dark red energy, a twisted reflection of his own fury and liberation. The creature lunged, but Asher's blade met it midair, piercing straight through its core. For an instant, it froze, the light in its eyes dimming, as if the life itself was draining from it. He twisted the blade, shattering the creature from within. It let out a soul-piercing shriek as its body disintegrated, dissolving into tendrils of darkness that swirled and faded into nothingness. The maze around him began to unravel, the oppressive shadows peeling back to reveal a soft, dimly lit clearing. For a moment, he stood there, catching his breath, blood and shadows streaked across his arms, feeling as if the weight he'd carried had finally lessened.
The test was over.
Pity, I wanted more fun, Asher's alternate personality muttered as he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the more composed, less ruthless Asher was back. Ha! Asher wondered aloud, looking around. He saw many contestants sitting calmly in the clearing, waiting. When did I pass the test? He thought, memories surfacing.
Don't tell me?
He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Yeah, it must have been those memories that disoriented me, he reasoned, then found a quiet corner to sit in as he waited for the next trial. As Asher settled into his corner, he observed the others around him. Many of them bore signs of strain, some were pale, others visibly trembling. The maze had clearly taken a toll, and it dawned on him just how brutal the tests had been. Yet, despite their shaken states, no one was openly speaking about what they'd experienced. There was an unspoken understanding that whatever horrors each had faced in the maze were their own to bear. He leaned back, letting his mind wander over what he'd just been through. Those voices, that monstrous figure, the shadows, each seemed crafted to target something buried deep within him. It was as if the maze had reached into his very soul and pulled out every buried memory, every fragment of doubt and fear. Yet, something else had emerged from those depths, a darker side of him, lurking just beneath the surface, both unnerving and powerful. The air grew tense as the contenders gathered for the second trial, known as the trial by combat. A vast, open training ground lay before them, rough dirt scattered with patches of scorched earth from past battles. In the center of the field, a massive magic-infused golem awaited, its stone body etched with runes that pulsed with a faint glow. The elder overseeing the trial called out, "This is the trial by combat. You'll face the magic golem, a creature that doubles in strength every minute. Be swift, be ruthless, or be left behind. The one lasts, the longer wins the first rank." Asher studied the golem intently. Standing over 10 feet tall, it had eyes glowing with a cold, almost sentient intelligence. The runes along its limbs flickered as it activated, and with a low rumble, it began to advance, each footfall shaking the ground. Several participants around Asher muttered strategies, discussing how best to handle the golem. But Asher, unfazed, stepped forward, gripping his blade. The golem's first strike was slow, testing the waters, but the impact of its heavy fist against the ground sent a shockwave that rattled Asher's bones. He sidestepped, his blade flashing as he drove it toward a rune on the golem's arm, hoping to disrupt its magical flow. The sword connected with a harsh, metallic ring, and for a moment, a fissure split the stone. But the golem responded almost instantly, its other arm swinging around with alarming speed, nearly grazing him. Damn, Asher muttered, retreating several steps as he regrouped, his gaze sharper. The minute mark hit, and the golem's power surged. Its runes flared brighter, its movements accelerating. What had once been a lumbering beast now moved with frightening agility. Each swing of its limbs was precise, relentless, and fast. Asher fell into a rhythm, dodging and striking when he could, but the golem adapted, learning from his moves. Its strikes became more targeted, and the ground beneath them bore scars of their clash, each impact sinking deeper into the earth. Asher's breath grew harsher, yet his focus sharpened with every close call. Each time the golem strengthened, it forced Asher to push harder, testing his skills and reflexes like never before. He knew he had only seconds between each surge to inflict as much damage as possible, and as the fight raged on, he was forced to face his own limits in a way no previous battle had demanded. As the minutes ticked by, the golem's power multiplied, its sheer presence now a massive force that seemed to weigh on the entire arena. Asher was still keeping pace, though beads of sweat were beginning to form on his forehead. His every move was sharp and precise, but even his focus was stretched thin with each enhancement to the golem's strength. Among the onlookers, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Elites from powerful families exchanged glances, some smirking, others silently observing with narrowed eyes. "He's reckless," commented Adrian from the Indra family, his arms crossed as he leaned casually against a post. "He's fighting it head-on, no strategy. I could take that thing down with half the effort." Bold words, responded Iris from the Artemis family, her tone dripping with sarcasm as she watched Asher dodge another brutal swing. But if you think you're better, why don't you go out there and show him? Adrian huffed but said nothing, and Iris gave a slight smirk, her eyes flickering back to Asher with a spark of admiration. You have to admit, he's got nerve. Most wouldn't last this long. Asher, meanwhile, pivoted quickly to avoid the golem's sweeping arm, his mind racing with options. He knew he'd need more than just raw strength to take it down. With a deep breath, he tapped into one of his abilities, summoning a faint blue aura that wrapped around his hands and blade. The air around his sword grew sharp with energy, vibrating with the resonance of his newfound skill, Resonant Strike. He tightened his grip and slashed at the golem's chest, aiming for the core rune etched deep in its stone body. The blade sang as it connected, cutting deeper than before. A crack formed, and pieces of stone fell away, revealing an inner glow. That's it, Asher muttered, his eyes narrowing as he steadied his stance. But the golem wasn't finished. It responded to the attack with a furious roar, a shock wave emanating from its core that forced Asher to skid backward, his feet digging into the dirt to regain balance. The golem's eyes flashed, and its hands ignited with a dark energy. It lunged toward Asher, each of its strikes now empowered with crushing force that could pulverize stone. Asher braced himself, then activated another skill, Phantom Step. His figure blurred, splitting into afterimages as he dodged, weaving around the golem with dizzying speed. Each step left a faint trace, making it difficult for the golem to track his movements. But with each minute, the creature grew even stronger, adapting to his maneuvers. Back among the watching crowd, others had begun to take interest as well. Cale from the Riverdale family shook his head, watching with a blend of skepticism and awe. He won't last much longer at this rate. The golem's power doubles every minute, even I'd be cautious against something that gains strength that fast. Oh, don't be so quick to dismiss him, interjected Helena from the Helios family. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Look at his footwork. He's drawing the golem to expose weak points. He's testing it. Across the arena, Asher felt the golem's energy surge yet again, the stone behemoth now moving with frightening speed. It was almost blinding, the way its limbs blurred through the air, yet Asher moved with the creature, studying its rhythm and anticipating its moves. With each swing it missed, he let his own aura flow around him, creating a protective shield that buffered the impact of any blows that came too close. Just then, he caught sight of a nearby boulder and an idea took form. Using Force Leap, a burst of energy propelled him onto the rock, giving him a temporary vantage point. As the golem lunged forward, he jumped into the air, gathering energy around his blade. With a shout, he unleashed Crimson Cleave, a red slash of pure power that tore into the golem's chest, sending pieces of stone and magical residue flying. The crowd gasped, even those from prestigious families couldn't help but stare in surprise. One of them, Darren from the Dagon family, shook his head, his voice laced with reluctant admiration. Not bad. He's pushing that thing harder than I expected. As the battle continued, Asher's resilience became the main point of interest for the crowd, and even for the seasoned elders observing from above. They exchanged murmurs, watching the young warrior's form as he maneuvered around the golem with impressive precision. One elder, a hardened silver-bearded instructor named Valen, folded his arms, his gaze sharpening. More than 5 minutes, he muttered, a hint of admiration breaking his usually stoic expression. By now, that thing's strength will breach platinum rank in seconds. He turned to the head instructor, who nodded in agreement, surprised himself by Asher's fortitude. Meanwhile, on the ground, Asher's breathing became heavier as he measured his options, his focus unwavering despite the enormous strain. The golem had reached an almost monstrous size, its form thrumming with lethal energy. Its movements, though slower due to its massive form, were accompanied by a force so strong that each step shook the earth around him. He knew he couldn't rely solely on physical attacks anymore. It was time for a more specialized approach. With a focused breath, Asher activated his Blood Supreme ability. A faint red aura glowed around him, swirling and pulsating, as he tapped into the innate control he had over his own blood. His body seemed to pulse with raw power as he guided his blood energy, sharpening his senses and heightening his physical abilities. More than that, his ability to manipulate his blood allowed him to weaponize it, forming razor-thin whips that lashed out around him. The golem lunged forward, its massive fist descending like a hammer, but Asher sidestepped, his blood tendrils shooting forward and wrapping around its arm with precision. With a twist of his wrist, he controlled the blood, hardening it into razor-sharp threads that sliced into the golem's rocky surface. Shards of stone splintered off as the golem roared, swinging wildly, only to have its limbs restrained by the blood whips that Asher manipulated with effortless grace. In the stands, some of the family elites were beginning to grasp the depth of his abilities. Kale from the Riverdale family raised an eyebrow, a glimmer of respect crossing his usually aloof expression. He's controlling his blood? That's much advanced techniques, not something you see every day, especially not for this long against something this powerful. The Dagon family's Darren watched, arms crossed tightly, a reluctant admiration brewing in his gaze. It's effective, he muttered under his breath. But if the golem's power reaches platinum, it might overpower even that. The elders, meanwhile, whispered amongst themselves, noting how Asher's unique skill allowed him to keep pace with the ever-growing threat. Even Elder Valen watched with a faint smile of respect as Asher's blood control continued to counter the golem's relentless attacks. The elders exchanged murmurs, impressed by Asher's endurance. It wasn't often they saw such relentless persistence, especially against an opponent that doubled in strength every minute. Elder Valen, now fully attentive, signaled for Asher to stop as the golem finally dissolved into dust, marking the end of his trial. In the end, Asher endured for over 15 minutes and 45 seconds. Asher staggered slightly, catching his breath as he looked up. Elder Valen approached, observing him with a mixture of curiosity and approval. "Young man, what is your name?" the elder inquired. "Asher Magnus," he replied, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. Valen nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, a Magnus, no wonder. You must be one of the Turos, yes?" "Yes," Asher confirmed, meeting the elder's gaze. Valen raised his hand, signaling to his watch as it took a picture of Asher. "I've recorded your image," he said with a faint smile. "You have officially broken the Academy's endurance record for the trial by combat." Asher tilted his head, intrigued. "What was the previous record?" Valen's smile widened. "The previous record was 4 minutes and 18 seconds less than yours," he revealed. "Impressive. You've set a new bar for endurance here." With that, Elder Valen marked Asher as passed, and called for the next student, but the murmurs among the students and spectators lingered. As the next participant stepped forward, the audience held their breath, each contender bringing with them the unique powers of their legendary families. The magic golem, a formidable creation that doubled its strength every minute, had already claimed many attempts. Now it was time for the other elites to step up, each determined to outlast Asher's impressive record of 15 minutes and 45 seconds. First to face the golem was Darren from the Dagon family, wielding the Overlord ability. Known for his powerful command over creatures, Darren was able to temporarily tame the golem, forcing it to halt its relentless attacks and respond to his commands. With a mix of control and calculated strikes, he kept the golem's power in check. However, as the creature's strength doubled minute after minute, its resistance to Darren's control grew. After 9 minutes, Darren was forced to retreat, unable to keep up with the golem's mounting resistance. The crowd murmured in approval, impressed by his skill. Next came Silas from the Black family, a master of necromancy. With a wave of his hand, Silas summoned undead creatures to aid him, each one reinforcing his attacks and absorbing the golem's blows. Shadows gathered around him as he directed his minions to harass the golem from every angle, softening its attacks. But as the golem's power intensified, the undead couldn't hold up under the pressure, crumbling against its raw strength. After 10 minutes, Silas withdrew, his dark creatures dissipating as the crowd applauded his mastery of death's forces. Elena from the Artemis family stepped up, her world-eye ability shining in her gaze. Her perceptive powers allowed her to anticipate the golem's moves, giving her an advantage as she dodged its strikes with ease. By using her vision-based abilities, she was able to spot weaknesses in its movements, striking with a precision that momentarily destabilized the golem. However, as the golem's power surged, her ability to predict and evade grew more challenging, and she found herself losing ground. She lasted 11 minutes before retreating, the crowd whispering in awe at her remarkable awareness and agility. Then Riven from the Indra family stepped forward, wielding his famed black lightning. Known for its speed and ferocity, the dark lightning crackled around his body as he struck the golem with blinding speed, each bolt leaving scorch marks on its surface. The crowd gasped as Riven's attacks sent shocks reverberating through the golem, slowing its responses. But as the golem's power doubled, Riven's lightning became less effective, its intensity no longer able to keep up with the monster's evolving defenses. After 9 minutes, he had to back down, visibly exhausted yet still retaining his confident smirk. From the Riverdale family, Kira, an Atlantean, was next. With her control over water, she summoned moisture from the air, creating powerful waves that crashed into the golem. She manipulated water currents to deflect its strikes and hamper its movement, skillfully crafting barriers with her water abilities. But as the golem grew stronger, its sheer force began to overpower her defenses, scattering her water-based attacks. Kira managed to hold out for 10 minutes before the golem's strength became too overwhelming. The audience was captivated by her elegance and mastery over water. Following Kira was Darien from the Helion family, wielding the Hellfire ability. Flames erupted around him, the intense heat and bright red-orange glow causing the air itself to waver. The crowd watched as his flames surrounded the golem, slowly engulfing it in a burning hellscape. Darien's fire was particularly feared, capable of incinerating most enemies within moments. However, as the golem's resilience grew, it began to push through the flames, undeterred by the burning heat. After 8 minutes, Darien withdrew, leaving behind scorched earth and impressed murmurs among the spectators. Freya from the Enrose family followed, her world tree ability blooming to life around her. Vines and branches sprouted from the ground, wrapping around the golem to immobilize it, while roots thickened the earth beneath her feet, creating a barrier of nature's power. Freya controlled her plants to shield her from the golem's strikes, each hit only feeding the root's growth. But as the golem's strength surged, it tore through her plant-based defenses. Freya held out for 11 minutes before the relentless force of the golem forced her to step back. The crowd admired her ingenuity and connection to nature. Magna from the Magnus family, the last to face the golem before Asher, stepped up confidently. His Blood Ruler ability allowed him to merge with the abilities of others, amplifying his own powers and offering him unmatched versatility. Drawing upon the energy of his family's legacy, he unleashed a fierce barrage of strikes, each one adapting to the golem's evolving strength. Magna managed to maintain the upper hand for an impressive 12 minutes, his strikes morphing in intensity and style with each moment. Yet, even his power fell short of stopping the golem, and he too eventually had to back down. After each contestant's trial, the elders nodded with a mix of respect and curiosity. Even Elder Valen looked on, his smile hinting at approval as he took mental notes of each competitor's strengths and weaknesses. Their performance was extraordinary, but Asher's endurance of over 15 minutes had proven nearly impossible to beat. Many elite family members exchanged glances, some impressed, others quietly strategizing, murmuring about Asher's prowess. They wondered if anyone in the academy would have the skills or endurance to surpass him in the trials ahead. Finally, Asher was home. The dinner had ended, the guests had departed, and the mansion had grown quiet once again. His aunts and uncles had each left him with parting gifts, ranging from the practical to the extravagant. But his mother, ever composed, had simply walked up to him, offered a firm nod and a curt, "Good job," before handing him a sword, and leaving without another word. Now alone in his room, Asher sat on the edge of his bed, staring down at the weapon in his hands. The sword was unlike any he'd held before. A massive greatsword with a crimson, semi-transparent crystalline blade that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Its hilt was jet black, engraved with a sleek, bat-shaped emblem. The weight in his hands felt perfect, like it belonged to him. "Blood Eater," Asher whispered, instantly recognizing it. A legendary weapon, and not just in name. He could feel its dormant hunger pulsing with quiet power. He gently placed it on the table beside him and activated his ability. Absolute Appraisal. A soft glow enveloped the gifts surrounding him as intricate details began to surface in his vision.
Blood Eater. Rating, Legendary. Durability, 1/110/1/110.
Attack power, 1836.
Effects.
Absorbs blood to regain durability. Increases sword mastery by +5.
Skill generated, Blood Curse.
Reduces target's healing by 100% for 10 seconds after a hit. Heavy strikes inflict a 3-second bleeding effect. Bleed damage scales with infused mana. Stacking bleeding status increases damage dealt by 500% for 10 seconds. When Blood Curse is applied 3 times, the target enters a berserk blood state, reducing cognitive ability by 50%. Lore, forged using the Blood Rose of Resentment, a rare bloom that only grows on battlefields soaked in hatred. Hidden effect, evolves by drinking the blood of a sanguine supreme with high concentrations of true blood. Asher raised an eyebrow. That last line caught his attention. "How much will it grow?" he asked curiously. "It depends on the host's level and purity of true blood offered."
He nodded slowly.
"I'll feed it when I'm stronger. Let it evolve with me." Setting the sword aside, he turned to the other gifts, beginning with the art manual from Uncle Liam. Black Assimilation.
Rank, S.
Effect, allows a blood ruler to absorb poisons or elixirs through blood and gain their effects permanently. Asher's eyes gleamed. This could be game-changing. I already know what I want to assimilate. Next came Aunt Serena's gift, a beautifully designed goblet with silver runes and crimson glass.
Goblet of the Blood Fountain.
Effect, stores large quantities of blood for future use in techniques or emergencies. Capacity, 1,000 liters. This will be a lifesaver in prolonged battles, Asher murmured. Perfect for blood-based casting. Then came Uncle Ryder's gift, a rolled scroll tied with a red ribbon. Blood Golem Creation.
Rank S. Effect: summons sentient blood golems.
Can create 3 types, depending on user's mastery and understanding.
Asher smirked.
Combining this with the blood fountain, I can build an army on the battlefield. Finally, he turned to his grandfather's gift, a white staff with glowing red patterns, elegant and powerful. At the top perched a carved phoenix, its beak gripping a blood-red orb.
Blood Phoenix Staff. Rating: Mythical.
Durability: 1, 500/1, 500. Attack power: 1,980. Magic power: 2,150.
Effects:
Blood empowerment: absorbs ambient or enemy blood to restore durability. Mana infusion: scales AoE and power of blood-based spells. Phoenix Flame of Blood: critical hits ignite blood flames for 5 seconds. Burn damage scales with magic power and blood absorbed. Blood Mastery. Staff Mastery +5. Boosts blood-related spells by 30%. Blood Phoenix's Rebirth auto-activates when health drops below 20%, restoring 30% HP. Blood Curse: every strike reduces healing by 100% for 10 seconds. After 3 hits, target enters Berserk Blood state. Lore: crafted from the blood rose of resentment, designed for those with a lineage steeped in blood and battle.
Hidden effect:
Blood Phoenix Growth evolves when fed the true blood of a Sanguine Supreme. Another weapon made from the blood rose, Asher mused, reverently storing it away. Then, he turned his thoughts to the arts themselves. Soul, he called to his system, can I learn them instantly? Yes, but you lack skill points. The host can gain skill points by eliminating intelligent beings. The higher their level, the more skill points gained. Asher frowned, considering that. So, to grow stronger, I'll have to kill. He paused, then asked, how many skill points do I need to learn both?
Arts in Possession.
Black Assimilation, S. Blood Golem Creation, S. Cost per art 5 skill points. Total required 10 skill points. Alright, Asher whispered, I'll start preparing. He stored everything in his dimensional ring, leaned back into bed, and let out a long sigh. His mind was buzzing with thoughts of battle, evolution, and what lay ahead. Tomorrow, he muttered as sleep began to take hold, I'll head to the monster area. His eyes closed, the weight of the future resting on his shoulders, and a faint smirk on his lips. The path of a terror had only just begun. Elder Valen nodded in satisfaction as he reviewed the final tally. Over 140 students had managed to pass the trial by combat, a record in itself, a testament to the Academy's talented new recruits. As the last of the students exited the clearing, the elders exchanged knowing glances, each understanding that the coming days would demand the same intensity, and more, from these hopefuls. Impressive, Elder Valen remarked to the elders beside him. I don't remember the last time we saw such resilience from this many students. Elder Seraphine, a dignified woman from the Enrose family, nodded thoughtfully. The families have done well this year. Each elite displayed considerable skill, though some surprised even me. She glanced over at Asher, who was quietly catching his breath among the other students, his eyes still scanning his surroundings with a wary determination. Indeed, added Elder Braxton of the Dagon family. That boy, Asher Magnus. He lasted beyond the expected threshold. A Magnus with that level of control, unusual. He stroked his beard, a glint of interest in his eyes. I'd say he has potential, and if he continues like this, he could be a serious contender. Other elders nearby murmured their agreement. Some had their attention on students from their own families, but all had taken note of Asher. His unyielding resilience had struck a chord, especially as he had faced the golem alone for nearly 16 minutes. Elder Valen cleared his throat and addressed the gathered students. You have all done well to pass the trial by combat. However, understand that today's challenges were merely the beginning. The Academy demands both strength and perseverance, and each of you has a long path ahead. But those who proved themselves today, he paused, allowing his gaze to rest momentarily on Asher, as well as others who had shown notable skill, should be prepared. Greater challenges await. The students, some still panting, some brimming with pride, and others with quiet resolve, exchanged glances as they absorbed Elder Valen's words. The elite family members, despite their prestige, felt the weight of the Academy's expectations. Even Darren of the Dagon family, usually smug and self-assured, seemed thoughtful as he stood among his peers. As the elders concluded the trial, the academy grounds buzzed with conversations. Many students discussed strategies, seeking insight from those who had lasted the longest. A few from the prestigious families, like Silas of the Black family and Freya of the Enrose family, cast curious glances in Asher's direction, subtly acknowledging his unexpected endurance. Yet, for Asher, the trial was a mere step. His mind was already on the challenges ahead, each test a chance to confront the shadows of his past and grow beyond them. Elder Valen addressed the students again as they gathered, anticipation thick in the air. "You have each shown the strength of your minds by overcoming the nightmares," Elder Valen began. "Then, in the trial by combat, you displayed the power within you to conquer formidable foes. But now, we will test your endurance and resilience. The next trial is the trial of stamina. Only those with unwavering perseverance will succeed." Murmurs rippled through the group, students sharing glances of both excitement and apprehension. This trial was rumored to push even the strongest bodies and wills to their breaking point. Elder Valen raised his hand for silence. "The trial of stamina will take place in the abyssal fields. There, a gravity field enhanced by ancient magic will test your physical endurance and ability to remain focused under immense pressure. Every 5 minutes, the gravity will increase by another 25%, and you will need to withstand the weight bearing down on you for as long as possible. You may use any abilities at your disposal, but be aware, this trial is not simply about brute force." The students felt a mix of fear and excitement, with some eagerly discussing strategies. Asher, however, remained quiet, absorbing the details of the trial. The academy was testing not just his power but his capacity to endure challenges that went beyond combat. "Remember," Elder Valen continued, "there is no shame in surrendering when the gravity becomes too intense. You must know your own limits." With that, he gestured toward the abyssal fields, and the students made their way there, each preparing mentally and physically for what lay ahead. Upon reaching the field, the students could feel the intensity of the magic-infused ground. Even standing still felt as though the ground was pulling them downward, anchoring them to the spot. One by one, they entered the designated zone, and the trial began. Within the first 5 minutes, the gravity had already increased to a challenging level, and several students were visibly straining. Asher took a steady breath, feeling the pressure but holding his ground, his eyes focused on the ground as he steadied his stance. Some students employed their family abilities to assist them. Freya from the Enrose family used her World Tree ability to grow roots into the ground, anchoring herself and absorbing some of the pressure. Around Asher, other elites battled the gravity field in their own ways. Silas of the Black family, utilizing his necromancy, summoned skeletal constructs to brace his body and provide support, though the gravity gradually broke the bones, forcing him to continually reanimate them. Darren from the Dagon family, known for his overlord powers, summoned massive, resilient creatures to shield him from the increasing weight, allowing him to stay on his feet longer than most. Evelyn of the Helion family, her body cloaked in hellfire, seemed to sear through the oppressive force for a while, but the strain soon showed as beads of sweat formed on her brow, her flames flickering under the unrelenting pressure. As the gravity intensified to over twice its usual strength, some students were visibly struggling. Even the proud elites, accustomed to mastery over their abilities, were pushed to their limits. Asher remained rooted, using his blood supreme ability to circulate blood to his muscles, heightening his physical resilience. He felt the intense pressure, but he adapted, focusing on his breathing and controlling his body with precision. The elders watched closely, noting each student's approach to overcoming the trial. Elder Seraphine nodded approvingly, her gaze lingering on Freya and Silas as they used resourceful applications of their family powers. Elder Valen watched Asher, intrigued by his unconventional approach. "He is showing remarkable discipline," he muttered to himself, impressed. By the 15-minute mark, some students dropped out, unable to withstand the force pressing down on them. Those who remained were drenched in sweat, faces etched with strain, yet their eyes held determination. When the gravity reached its peak, pushing close to quadruple its normal strength, Asher gritted his teeth. His body trembled under the weight, but he held on. His blood ruler ability pulsed, forcing his muscles to endure the seemingly unbearable pressure. He glanced around and noticed that others were watching him, some with admiration, others with envy. Finally, Elder Valen raised his hand. "Enough. The trial of stamina is complete. Those who remain standing have shown resilience worthy of academy elites." The gravity field lifted, and the students who had endured to the end staggered, taking in deep breaths. Elder Valen looked at each of them with approval. "To survive the abyssal fields is no small feat," he announced. "You have shown both mental and physical fortitude. Remember these lessons, for your trials are not over yet." Exhausted but proud, the students exchanged glances, nodding with respect toward one another, particularly to Asher. He had pushed beyond limits they hadn't expected, setting a high standard as they prepared for whatever trials lay ahead. With the trial of stamina behind them, the students barely had a moment to rest before Elder Valen called them together once more. His eyes swept across the group, lingering on those who had endured the crushing force of the abyssal fields. "You have shown physical resilience," Elder Valen began, his voice echoing over the silent crowd. "But now, we will test your adaptability and mastery over your powers. This next trial is known as the Trial of Elemental Chaos." The name alone caused murmurs among the students. The Trial of Elemental Chaos was infamous within the academy, known to test a student's ability to adapt quickly to unpredictable shifts in the environment. Elder Valen continued, "In this trial, each of you will enter the Chaos Chamber, a vast arena filled with wild elemental energies that will shift without warning. Fire, water, earth, and air will clash and combine. You must survive, counter, or adapt to each element as it emerges and shifts. This trial does not simply test strength, but ingenuity and precision in controlling your abilities." Asher and the others were ushered to the entrance of the Chaos Chamber. Inside, they could see the arena stretching out, an almost surreal landscape where fire blazed, water churned, winds howled, and chunks of earth floated or erupted unpredictably from the ground. One by one, students were called to enter the chamber. Asher's name was announced, and he stepped forward, his expression set with determination. The doors closed behind him, and he found himself alone in the ever-shifting elemental landscape. Immediately, a wave of fire surged toward him, intense and roaring. He reacted swiftly, using his blood-supreme ability to form a shield of hardened blood around himself, blocking the flames. The shield held, but he could feel the heat pressing through. He quickly dropped it just as a burst of water came crashing down from above, dousing the flames but nearly knocking him off balance. Outside the chamber, students watched the scenes on a projected display, and some gasped as they saw Asher maneuver through the rapid changes. Freya from the Enrose family smirked slightly. "He's quick on his feet," she murmured to Darren of the Dagon family. Inside, the air suddenly shifted, turning frigid as icy winds swept through the chamber, forming spikes that hurled themselves toward Asher. He dropped low, channeling his blood to create a quick layer of hardened armor along his arms, blocking the sharp edges as he braced against the storm. The elders observed from above, Elder Valen watching Asher with a look of approval. "Impressive. He's using his blood ruler ability in ways that I doubt even his family taught him," Elder Valen commented to Elder Seraphine. "Perhaps," she replied, "but watch, he's also conserving his strength, waiting for the right moments." The elemental assault grew more chaotic with each passing minute. Lightning crackled from above, streaking down toward Asher with deadly speed. Drawing on his training, he shifted his stance and raised a blood-formed lance, grounding the energy as it struck. The force nearly knocked him off his feet, but he gritted his teeth and stayed upright, his eyes narrowed as he looked for the next threat. In the spectator area, students watched in awe as Asher withstood each wave. Even those who had been unimpressed by him before now murmured in respect. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of battling through flames, ice, winds, and lightning, the arena fell still, and the elemental chaos dissipated. Asher stood panting, his clothes singed, his body aching, but his resolve unbroken. The chamber doors opened, and Asher walked out, receiving nods and whispers from fellow students and elders alike. Elder Valen addressed the crowd once more. "Asher Magnus has shown skill and adaptability. Each of you must show the same." The next student, Evelyn of the Helion family, stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with determination as she entered the chamber. Evelyn's hellfire abilities blazed around her, flames consuming and countering the elemental onslaught with fierce intensity. She held her ground, but the trial forced her to the brink. After 7 grueling minutes, she emerged, sweat streaming down her face, a proud but weary look in her eyes. Others followed. Darren of the Dagon family relied on his overlord abilities, summoning creatures to shield him from each element. His beasts took the brunt of the attacks, but as the trial intensified, he had to adapt, shifting to using only his raw skill and stamina to endure. He lasted 5 minutes before conceding. Silas of the Black family, with his necromancy abilities, animated skeletal shields and used dark energies to block and dissipate incoming attacks. The shadows moved around him like a living armor, absorbing much of the elemental chaos. He withstood for 6 minutes, impressing the elders with his resourcefulness. Freya of the Enrose family wove her world tree powers into a defense, growing vines and bark that absorbed some of the attacks. Her resilience shone, and she managed a respectable 8 minutes before exiting the chamber. After each trial, the elders discussed the performance of each student, with Elder Valen offering nods of approval at notable moments. When all had faced the trial of elemental chaos, he addressed them again. You have all faced the untamed forces of nature and come through with skill and resilience, he said. Those who completed this trial have demonstrated adaptability and strength. Remember this feeling as you move forward. The students, tired but emboldened, gathered their composure. With every trial, they were beginning to understand the depths of the Academy's expectations and the true power required to reach their goals. As the students gathered once more, Elder Valen's sharp gaze swept over the remaining contestants. Each one bore signs of wear from the previous trials: scorched clothing, battered armor, and weary eyes. Yet, none dared show weakness. They knew the final test loomed large, the one trial that would determine the strongest among them. The last trial, Elder Valen began, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade, is Trial of Dominion.
The air grew tense.
Whispers rippled through the crowd. The Trial of Dominion was a test of absolute power and control, the very essence of mastery over one's abilities. Unlike the other trials, this one was direct. Students would face off against one another in combat. The winner was the one who could force their opponent to submit, not through brute strength alone but through sheer dominance of power, skill, and tactics. Elder Valen continued, "You will be paired randomly. Each match will push you to your limits. Use everything you've learned so far, and remember, your goal is not to destroy your opponent but to assert your dominion over them. Victory comes only when your opponent yields or can no longer fight." The announcement sent a ripple of energy through the students. Some cracked their knuckles, others took deep breaths, steeling themselves for the challenge ahead. Soon the matches were randomly assigned as coincidentally or by Elder's will. Asher got himself the first match. From the center came out on stage as both Asher and his opponent climbed it. The first match drew gasps from the spectators. Asher, whose performances had already shaken many, was paired against Evelyn, a fire-wielding prodigy of the Helion family. The arena was a circular field, surrounded by shimmering magical barriers that would contain their abilities. As the two stepped into the ring, Evelyn's flames already flickered around her, licking at the air like hungry serpents. Asher, calm and composed, stood with his blade of hardened blood at the ready. "Don't hold back," Evelyn smirked, her eyes burning as fiercely as her flames. "I never do," Asher replied, his voice cold. The match began with an eruption of fire. Evelyn unleashed a torrent of hellfire that surged toward Asher, the heat warping the air. Asher countered with a shield of blood, the crimson barrier sizzling under the onslaught but holding firm. He shifted quickly, breaking the shield into projectiles and launching them at Evelyn, forcing her to evade. Evelyn retaliated with fiery explosions that shook the arena, but Asher's agility kept him one step ahead. He used his blood ruler ability to manipulate his blood into a series of whips, striking at her from multiple angles. Evelyn gritted her teeth, summoning a massive inferno to force Asher back, but he pushed through, his blood armor absorbing some of the heat. Outside the arena, the elders observed intently. "He's remarkably adaptable," Elder Seraphine remarked. "But can he withstand the ferocity of Helion's flames for long?"
Elder Valen nodded.
"His endurance will be tested here." The fight escalated as Evelyn poured all her energy into a devastating hellfire nova, engulfing the entire arena in flames. For a moment, the spectators thought Asher had been consumed, but when the fire dissipated, he stood unharmed, surrounded by a crimson barrier of swirling blood.
"My turn," Asher muttered, his voice like ice.
He raised his hand, and tendrils of blood erupted from the ground, ensnaring Evelyn. She struggled, her flames burning through the bindings, but Asher was relentless. He advanced, his blade glowing with dark energy, until he stood inches from her. "Yield," he demanded, his voice commanding. Evelyn hesitated, her flames flickering weakly. She clenched her fists but finally dropped to one knee.
"I yield."
Elder snapped his finger as both Asher and Evelyn returned downstairs. "Next pair," he said as next two contestants climbed up as they stood on the stage. Darren Dagon versus Freya Enrose. The arena trembled as Darren summoned his colossal beast, a scaled six-legged titan with glowing red eyes and a roar that sent shivers through the crowd. The creature radiated raw, primal power, each step cracking the ground beneath it. Darren stood confidently behind his summon, his hands raised as streams of overlord energy flowed into the creature, strengthening it further. Freya, calm and composed, placed her hand on the ground, and in an instant, massive roots erupted from the earth, weaving together into a towering wall of wood and foliage. The beast charged, its claws slashing through the barrier like paper, but Freya remained unfazed, summoning even larger roots that wrapped around its limbs, pulling it back. The crowd gasped as the battle turned into a test of endurance. Darren directed his beast to unleash a devastating energy blast from its mouth, obliterating the roots holding it down. Freya retaliated by summoning a forest of thorn vines, each one lashing out like a whip, cutting into the creature's hide and drawing dark blood. The beast roared, its rage shaking the arena, but Freya pressed on, her roots growing faster and stronger, weaving together until the beast was completely immobilized.